Chapter 195. On the surface of the ice, a loud and clear song echoed. With the glory of Thoradin the Great, we rushed to the south, and planted the blue lion flag on the King's Valley, that is the symbol of humanity's great legacy. We put our fate in your hands, the golden lion flag. Ah, the golden lion, you are the symbol of dignity and nobility, you are the knight that symbolizes honor. Ah, Stormwind City, you are the fortress of pioneers, the bridgehead of humanity's civilization, no matter what enemy it is, you can defeat it. This song was originally an unknown tune from 1,000 years ago, but unknowingly, it became one of the military songs of Stormwind, and would be played during every break of military training. But now that it was sung by the warriors who had lost their country, there was an additional sense of sorrow and sorrow. To every warrior of Stormwind, only when they had truly taken back Stormwind City and reclaimed the Elven Forest would they be worthy of this military song. After more than half a year of suffering, the journey was full of bitterness. The warriors of Stormwind used their blood and tears to water every inch of land from the Red Ridge Mountains to the Elven Forest, and then to Stormwind City. Some lost their houses and fields, some lost their best friends of many years, some lost their wives and children, and what was worse was that they had lost their own capital. From now on, they were just stray dogs in the eyes of others. But no matter how strong the orcs were, they were not depressed. Because they had a great King Lang who had accompanied them until the very end. They had a great commander, Andoin, who was always encouraging them and leading them. They also had a great hero who had mysterious abilities and created one miracle after another, Duque. Tonight, all the suffering had temporarily come to an end. From the next dawn, they firmly believed that under the leadership of these heroes, they would finally win the war against the orcs. Sir Marcus. Thank you. You are our benefactor, our hope, thank you, I can finally live to see my wife and children. As Stormwind City disappeared into the horizon, the soldiers began to shout excitedly after surviving a disaster. The further away they were from Stormwind City, the more intense the flames were. If the sound at the beginning was just a trickle of spring water in the dense forest, then by the end, it had become a surging ocean. The sound waves were like huge waves set off by a hurricane, assaulting one's face. Duque, Lang, Bolvar, and the other higher-ups of the storm stood side by side at the front of the ice ship. It was at this moment that they truly understood what it meant to be a tsunami. When 50,000 people crowded together and raised their swords to cheer and salute, the shocking scene was definitely unforgettable. It was not a military parade, nor was it an act on the scene, but a sincere expression of gratitude. King Lang smiled. Duque, make a platform for the soldiers to see you. Duque was a little embarrassed. He was in the limelight, wasn't he? Your Majesty, this, Lang smiled as he patted the huge block of ice that had frozen Black Hand's head. He then looked at the huge tribal flag and said, these two things are enough for me. Besides, I've never cared about the reputation of a true hero being above mine. You see, I've never been the most famous person in the military. Lang was incomparably magnanimous. Andoin also egged Duque on. Young man, Lang is preparing to make you do hard labor. If you don't go collect some interest first, I'm afraid you'll be miserable for a long time. Bolvar also smiled and nodded at Duque. Duque no longer hesitated. A huge ice prism beneath his feet lifted Duque straight up. Seeing Duque's robed figure, a huge wave of cheers rose into the sky. All of a sudden, the dark clouds dispersed, and the tranquil moonlight shone on the surface of the ice. It was as if the moon had heard the cheers and sneakily poked its head out to take a look. Long live Duke Marcus! Long live the great guardian of the storm! It was no exaggeration to say that Duque's blood was boiling at this moment. He suddenly felt that all the hard work and preparation he had put in for so long was all worth it. At this moment, the system notification sounded. Congratulations, host. Your reputation in Stormwind has been permanently fixed at worship. Even if you lose all your integrity in the future, the people of Stormwind will still believe you unconditionally. In that case, your integrity will be seen as a hypocritical state. Hypocritical state. What the hell was that? Duque did not have time to think too much. He came down after receiving 3 waves of cheers from the soldiers. Andoin then asked, "What do we do next?" "Your merfolk are going to drag us to South Shore just like that." Duque could not help but laugh. "How is that possible? It's not easy to maintain this big ice ship, and the waves in the deep sea will be a problem. It's summer now, and the high temperature will easily melt the ice." Bolvar's expression turned a little ugly. "Damn it, we have almost no food and water. If the ice melts, won't it?" Bolvar had already imagined the tragic scene of a group of people wearing armor and sinking straight into the sea. Duque took out a simple sea map and pointed to an island opposite Stormwind City. "Our destination is here." The ice ship arrived at its destination early the next morning. It was a small island that was only 5 square kilometers in size. The biggest feature of the island was that it had a freshwater spring. The sea merchants who traveled between Stormwind City and Kul Tiras all knew of this nameless island. When there was a shortage of drinking water, most would choose to stop here to replenish their water. And now, there was enough bread to feed 50,000 people for half a month. The soldiers once again burst into fiery cheers when they stepped on land. Duque shrugged. "All right, the next step is to wait for the fleet to send us to South Shore." Under the shade of a few trees, the higher-ups of Stormwind began to discuss the future policies of the kingdom. "I plan to make a trip to Rotterdam. I want to unite all the human kingdoms, as well as the dwarves and high elves to form a huge alliance to fight against the orcs' invasion." Clayan revealed the plan that he had been thinking about for a long time. Rotterdam was located in the northeast of the Eastern Kingdom. It was the home that the Rotterdam Kingdom was most proud of. In fact, at this point in time, the Rotterdam Kingdom was the most powerful among the 7 human kingdoms. The rich Rotterdam Kingdom had the widest fields and the largest population among the 7 kingdoms. There was a saying that went, "I'd rather be a baron in Rotterdam than an earl in Torrential Fortress." This mentality was a good reflection of the richness of the land. "Should I stay in South Shore to train the troops?" Andoin asked. "No, you should follow His Majesty to Rotterdam." Duque rejected Lothar's suggestion. Chapter 196. Why? Lothar was puzzled. In his opinion, as the highest military commander of the kingdom, he should be with his soldiers. The 7 kingdoms need a reason to work together. Duque's answer enlightened everyone. Yes, the Arathar Empire. Being of the same race, of the same origin, and of the same clan, especially in front of a great enemy, was the best reason to unite. Moreover, there was no deep hatred between the 7 kingdoms. Abandoning the son of Thoradin the Great was indeed unkind, but they did not fight against each other. Hence, Lothar's identity as Thoradin's son was very important. "Your Majesty, I." It was difficult for Andoin to deal with such a sensitive issue. "Don't worry. After all, it was your ancestor who gave up the throne to my ancestor." In the eyes of outsiders, there was indeed a suspicion of usurpation. However, when it came to matters that concerned all of humanity, and even the world of Azeroth, such trifles were nothing. The training of the troops can be left to Bolvar. Andoin thought for a while, and nodded. At the end of the day, Lang, Andoin, and Bolvar were all very upright people. Without the restriction of those annoying nobles, they could exert their full strength. "Bolvar, I'll leave the training of the troops, my queen, and Varian to you." Lang did not have many capable subordinates. Some of the nobles who were originally in high positions had either become demons or been slaughtered by the demons in the middle of the sea. This was almost equivalent to the position of an assistant minister, and was definitely the highest of the highest. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Bolvar bowed deeply. Lang turned to look at Duque. He took a deep breath, and with a wave of his hand, a servant handed him a small spoon of melted wax. Another servant handed him a document, opened it, and poured the wax on it. Then, Lang took out the royal seal from his arms and stamped it heavily on the wax. "This is," Duque glanced at it, and saw his own name. King Lang turned his head and smiled at Duque. Duke Marcus, please kneel. Yes. Fine, the boss had given me an empty promise, so I'll just kneel then. Duke Marcus, in order to thank you for your great achievements, as well as to commend your loyalty, bravery, and wisdom, I now confer you the title of Duke of Stormwind. You are allowed to have twice the private army of a normal duke. Your fief consists of the following: Eastvale Lumberyard in the north, Karazhan in the south, Mistmantle Manor in the west, and Triangle Junction in the east. I know that there are many places that have fallen to the orcs, but I believe that one day, we, the Stormwind, will reclaim this beautiful and fertile land. He thought it was over, but who knew it wasn't? You will be the commander-in-chief of the Stormwind Navy. You will be in charge of all naval ships, and you will be allowed to recruit no more than 1/5 of the Navy's total forces. Duque was visibly moved. The private armies of the nobles in Stormwind were strictly limited by class. Dukes were not allowed to have more than 5,000 men. Twice that was 10,000. This was a legal military force that could be put on the table. As for the fief, no one knew better than Duque how powerful Stormwind was later in the history. Because the other human kingdoms had either fallen or declined, Stormwind City had become the greatest benchmark for the human race. Stormwind absorbed a large number of refugees from the north, and the speed at which its soldiers grew was even more exaggerated than the undead scourge. Indeed, the Headwind Trail had been blown to smithereens by Mediva's big explosion, but Eastvale Lumberyard and other rich lands in Elven Forest were definitely first-class fiefs. And as the commander-in-chief of the Navy, there was no doubt that the whole of Stormwind and the benefits derived from the sea were all given to Duque. Everyone knew that now that Stormwind had almost completely fallen, and it was only a matter of time before the western wilderness was completely destroyed, if Stormwind wanted to continue, it had to rely on Duque. However, it was rare for someone like Cleon to have such boldness. Without hesitation, Duque bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your gift." Lang smiled, and finally sighed. "What gift?" "If it wasn't for you, even if Stormwind was not completely destroyed, I'm afraid only tens of thousands of people would have escaped. Maybe even I would have died in Stormwind. I'm the one who feels guilty for making these empty promises." "Your Majesty, you've done very well," Anduin and the other officials comforted Lang. "Sigh, the resettlement of nearly 600,000 soldiers is a headache just thinking about it. But we don't have anything. If that doesn't work, try to ask other countries to take in our people." "Right. No money. No food. How could they survive?" Anduin and the others looked at each other, dumbfounded. In times of crisis, they only thought about saving people's lives and saving them first. Now that they had saved them, they were dumbfounded. They had to eat, drink, and go to the toilet. If it was only tens of thousands of people, they might be able to beg the other countries. But there were 600,000 people here. Just the thought of it was terrifying. Yet, when he escaped, he didn't bring anything with him other than his weapons. Not to mention that Duke Ferens, who was in charge of internal affairs, was dead. Even if he was not dead, he would probably be scared to death on the spot. "Duque, can I trouble you to go to Alterac, Rapids Castle, and the Dalajan to negotiate with the heads of the countries? Also, our national treasury is finished. I wonder if you can lend a sum of money to the kingdom in your own name." Lang's face was flushed when he said this. On one hand, he really did not have any talented people around him. Bolvar and the others were indeed righteous knights, but they were definitely not good at diplomacy. Moreover, if they were to go begging like beggars, it would be strange if the other side would have a good expression. On the other hand, a dignified king actually had to borrow money from a duke. What face did he have? And the richest person here was Duque. "Your Majesty, please do not worry about the national treasury." With that, Duque snapped his fingers, and two burly male Nagas carried a huge box out of the sea. The royal guards took the box and opened it. A burst of golden light almost blinded Lang and the other poor people's eyes. Gold bars. So many gold bars. These gold bars were engraved with the emblem of a lion. It was no doubt the gold bars used in Stormwind. These are. Lang stuttered. Your Majesty, have you forgotten? A while ago, when those nobles were escaping, they encountered the Bloodsail pirates. In order to escape, their ship turned and left behind a large amount of their belongings. Then, my Murlocs picked them up. Lang suddenly remembered that because those nobles had colluded with the demons, they had been demoted. According to the kingdom's laws, their fiefs and properties would be confiscated. At this moment, Andoin, Bolvar, and the royal guards all bowed to Duque. Duke Marcus, you have a heart that shines with a holy light. Chapter 197. Honesty, courage, wisdom, and loyalty, Duque had become a synonym for a saint in everyone's hearts. In reality, other than his smarts as a transmigrator, Duque's other three qualities were all bullsh*t. Duque had never thought that he had ever been loyal to Lang. As a modern man, deep in his bones, he was a boss and a worker. Duke would never be touched by the feeling of sacrificing his life for the other party. As a transmigrator who was familiar with history, Duque knew that money was not enough, but having too much money was useless. The most important thing was still power. His own power and the power of his subordinates. According to history, the First Orc War ended with the opening of the Dark Portal and the fall of Stormwind City. Then, the Orc army regrouped and headed north, looking for trouble with all the races and kingdoms on the continent. This was the start of the Second Orc War. Duque did not know if the Orcs would continue to go against all the races and factions on the continent like they did in history. Obviously, when Duque saw that the world of Azeroth's similarity had dropped from 80% to 79%, Duque realized that history would continue to be shockingly similar. Duke had saved 50,000 elite soldiers, as well as Leon, who hadn't died in history. Of course, Khadgar had died as well. He had killed over 100,000 Beastman elite soldiers and had even ruthlessly tricked Orgrim. Even with so much fate deviation, he had only managed to reduce the similarity by 1%. Just thinking about it made one drunk. However, when he thought about the mighty Burning Legion and the Creation Titans that would appear later on, he suddenly felt that it was quite amazing that he had done so much in exchange for 1% of the world's change. Alright, back to reality. At noon on the second day, the first batch of ships arrived. This batch of ships had more than enough space. After replenishing some daily necessities and medicine for the people waiting on the island, they carried a total of 16,000 people. On the ship, Duque was already busy. Because the tribe did not pay much attention to the western wilderness, Duque was able to secretly transport the summer grain that had not yet been sent to Stormwind City to Southshore. This batch of grain could greatly alleviate the food shortage in Southshore. In addition, there was the migration of the Murlocs and Nagas. In fact, the Orcs couldn't do anything to the Murlocs on the coast, but Duque needed the Murlocs more, Southshore. The entire continent of the Eastern Kingdom was actually divided into two continents, the North and the South, connected by a gigantic solder bridge. To the south of the southern continent was the territory of Stormwind, while to the north of the southern continent was the territory of the dwarves centered around Ironforge. To the southeast of the northern continent was the Earthy Highlands, which was where the Stromgarde kingdom was located. To the south was the Hillsbrad Hills, the territory of the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms, the Alterac kingdom. The place where the refugees of Stormwind City were evacuated was Southshore, which was located south of the Hillsbrad Hills by the sea. To the west of the northern continent was the magic kingdom of Dalagen, and to the north was the most powerful Lordaeron kingdom. Of course, the northernmost part of the northern continent was the High Elves' Kuel Salis kingdom. Now, Duque was moving the Murlocs because Duque needed the Murlocs to help reclaim the Murlocs there, and to fish as much as possible to provide fish for the Stormwind refugees. About 50,000 of the Stormwind refugees were taken in by the maritime kingdom of Kul Tiras, while 100,000 continued to move in the direction of Stromgarde, Alterac, Dalagen, and even Lordaeron. Including the 50,000 soldiers who were about to arrive, there were less than 450,000 people left in Southshore. Even so, it was a very heavy burden. Through the system Elf, Duque had already calculated that even if they found enough land to cultivate, they would still be short of at least 20,000 tons of food before the first harvest next year. In this era, it was almost an astronomical figure. It completely exceeded the amount of food that could be bought in the commercial market. Lang was running away from reality, and threw the food problem onto Duque's head. This made Duque's teeth hurt. He had a lot of things to do, such as finding time to go to the southernmost Stranglethorn Valley of the Eastern Kingdom to deal with the remaining Bloodsail pirates. Or finding time to practice magic. After much consideration, Duque decided to pay a visit to the Berev family in Alterac. Many people might wonder why Duque didn't visit the king of Alterac Kingdom, but the Berev family instead. It had to start from the history of the Alterac Kingdom. The Alterac Kingdom had a long history, but the current royal family's history was very short. It only lasted for the past 20 years. The first king of Alterac was born into a wealthy family, and in order to have a place of his own, he founded the Alterac Kingdom. He chose to build his kingdom on the steep Alterac mountain range. The land was barren, and the living conditions were terrible. Very few people were willing to follow him, and the kingdom's territory and power were very small. It was not an exaggeration to say that Alterac Kingdom was the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms. The current king, Aidan Pirinold, inherited this mess, and the situation only improved after the Berev family joined in. The Berev family of the Alterac Kingdom was a wealthy family that controlled a large amount of land east of the Alterac mountain range. Brill, Terran Mill, Cairdaro, South Shore. These places were all their fiefdoms. Their wealth surpassed that of the Alterac royal family. They had Arthi blood, and the family lived in Cairdaro County, which was an old castle of the Arthi people. They continued this ancient and noble family bloodline. In fact, the Berev family was the one that Duque had been dealing with. From the very beginning, Duque had never set his sights on the other factions to get the food. The transportation of food in this era was terrible. Even the slightest bit of distance would result in a 50% loss of food. The only thing that Duque felt lucky about was that most families had the habit of storing food because the harvest was not stable. As long as he could settle the rich Berev family, he would not have to worry about food until next year. A week later, Lang and Duque's group arrived at South Shore. Ryan was very surprised by the expanded South Shore. There was a stone pier built according to the standards of Stormwind City, and there were neat wooden houses as far as the eye could see from the entrance of South Shore. There were medical, food, fire protection, toilets, and all kinds of living facilities available. There was even a huge wooden wall being built. But after comforting the people, Lang hurried on the road to Lordaeron. Duque left Windsor to help him train his private army while he brought Makarov and the others to Cairdaro County to meet Alex Berev, Aidan's best friend, and now Duke Berev. Chapter 198. Just as Duque arrived at South Shore and was about to visit the Berev family, something huge happened in the tribe. Judgment. Traitor. Orgrim. You disgrace to the beast men. Hey, wolf. Hey, wolf. Hey, wolf. The clamor filled the entire camp. Every tribal warrior's eyes were bloodshot because of anger. Their necks seemed to be stuffed with 2 dicks, thick and red. They opened their mouths full of fangs and roared at the top of their lungs. At the center of the hall was Orgrim, who was kneeling on both knees. He was once the assistant of the great chief, but now he was a traitor in the eyes of the beast men. The horn that was used to summon the great chief was still sounding. It sounded as though it was mourning the death of the great chief, but it also seemed like it was trying to awaken the anger in the beastmen's hearts. Countless pebbles of all sizes were thrown at Orgrim, who was kneeling on the ground. These stones were the size of a human fist, and when they hit Orgrim's face, they were not fatal, but they were painful. However, the physical pain could not surpass the pain in his heart. It was the pain of losing 100,000 elites. It was the pain of the unknown fate of the beast men. It was the pain of knowing that Ghoul, Dan would lead the beast men to destruction once he returned. Orgrim's mind was still replaying the scene of that day. His good friend Doroten's smile was still echoing in his mind. That day, Doroten came. He told the Hammer of Destruction everything he knew, the contract with the Demon Lord, the origin of Ghoul Dan's power, and the betrayal of the clans under the control of the Shadow Council. The final and humiliating end that awaited the Beast Men was that they would be thrown as bait to the demons of the Burning Legion. As Orgrim listened, he tried his best to keep his wide face cold, making his aura and posture befitting of the assistant of the Great Chief. However, in his thick chest, his heart was beating violently, as though his famous Hammer of Destruction was beating on human flesh. Was this true? This sounded like a story spouted by an idiot who went through the dark portal and was messed up by the unknown energy in the void. Demons? Dark contract? What a joke. However, this was what Doroten had said. Doroten was not only the smartest, bravest, and most honorable chief of the tribe. He was also an old friend that Orgrim had trusted with his life more than once, and he had repaid Orgrim's trust with his greatness, courage, and integrity more than once. If these words were spoken by any other orc, Orgrim would definitely teach them a lesson with his hammer. If the one who said this was Doroten, then Orgrim's answer would be trustworthy. In the following days, Doroten paid the price for his integrity and loyalty to the tribe with his life. He and his wife, Draka, had been assassinated by the Shadow Council. Whenever he recalled this scene, Orgrim's steady hands would tremble uncontrollably. Orgrim couldn't help but ask himself, am I going to die? Should I die in such a cowardly manner as a traitor? No, there's a lot I haven't done yet. If I die like this, then no one will be able to control Ghoul Dan. This true traitor will lead the entire tribe into the abyss of death and shamelessly sell the souls of all orcs to the demons. Thinking of this, Orgrim suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar. I am not a traitor. Orgrim's voice was so loud that it was like a clap of thunder. It actually suppressed the clamor of the thousands of orcs present. Every orc's face froze. Their roars were suppressed into their throats, unable to come out. If you're not a traitor, then who is? A deep voice rang out. This voice had an inhuman coldness to it, as though the owner of this voice was temperamental. Kilrog Deadeye, the chief of the Bloodloop tribe. Due to the unexpected death of the chief, he had no choice but to temporarily hand over the army to his deputy and lead his personal guards back. With the Blackrock tribe suffering heavy losses, the authority of the Bloodloop tribe had undoubtedly increased. Among the chiefs of the dozens of tribes present, his authority could be ranked in the top 3. Orgrim stood up proudly and fearlessly looked Kilrog's remaining eye in the eye. For a moment, Orgrim's words were on the tip of his tongue. He almost said, Ghoul Dan is a traitor. But at this moment, Duke's face, which always had a mysterious smile on it, appeared in Orgrim's mind. Duke Marcus, the most powerful human mage, the most cunning strategist. He was the one who orchestrated all of this. He was the one who put the 100,000 orcs to death. He was the one who killed the chief. If not for him, perhaps the orcs would have had to put in more effort, but they definitely wouldn't have won such a Pyrrhic victory. Orgrim also had an even clearer understanding. The only person who could deal with the existence of the mystical realm was Ghoul Dan, who was also a mystical. Whether it was him or the other chiefs, they couldn't do anything to Duke. Thinking of this, Orgrim forcefully swallowed his words and instead let out a maniacal laugh. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Kilrog, you make me feel like a joke. Why do you think I'm a traitor who killed 100,000 of my own people for the sake of the humans? Why would you rather believe the lies of the humans than the loyalty of a orc? Why would you believe a despicable mage who set fire to us orcs again and again? Orgrim's rebuttal stunned the chieftains and the thousands of leaders around him. Orgrim's direct accusation that the arsonist was Duke was not wrong at all. Grom Hellscream roared as he strode forward. Then how do you explain the fact that more than one orc who survived in the area testified that the chief called you a traitor before he died? Also, why would your people attack the chief's personal guards? Don't you think that suddenly going crazy and attacking your own people is very familiar? It had to be said that Orgrim had the talent to win the Best Actor award. Yes, this scene was very familiar. It was the scene where the orc warlock used the art of fear on the human soldiers. You said Ghoul, Dan betrayed us. Grom frowned. I didn't say that. But you might have noticed that the humans' tactics and equipment have been improving. So it's not impossible for them to obtain the power of a warlock. The orc chiefs fell into deep thought. At this time, Kilrog Deadeye stood in front of Orgrim again. My Deadeye tells me that you shouldn't die here as a traitor. I also know that you are one of the wisest orc warriors, and you also have the ambition to become the chief. I can give you a chance to prove yourself, as long as you join Bag Ash. Orgrim's heart beat violently, almost jumping out of his chest. Chapter 199. Even Duque didn't know that because he had tricked Orgrim, it had caused Orgrim to invoke a ritual that had never appeared in any history, Bagrash. This was a ritual for orcs who were suspected of being traitors to prove their reputation. The ritual was very simple, violent, and bloody. That was, under the witness of at least 100 orc warriors, 7 recognized warriors would stab 7 daggers into the body of the ritual participant. The daggers couldn't cause fatal wounds, they couldn't injure the tendons or bones, and they couldn't injure the internal organs. Then, the participant would have to fight a duel to the death with a recognized warrior, usually a tribe chief, while having 7 daggers stabbed into their body. Only by winning the duel would the participant be considered to be cleared of suspicion and their reputation restored. No one knew why Kilrog would suggest letting Orgrim participate in Bagrash. If one had to force a reason on Kilrog, it would be his dead eye that could no longer see. Kilrog was born into the Bloodring clan of Draenor. When his clan was about to be exterminated by the Crowmen, Kilrog unwillingly bowed his head and admitted defeat. Under the arrangements of his sickly father, he followed the clan's ancient tradition, he found the hidden chamber that was named after his clan, and carried out the terrifying ritual of sacrificing his left eye in exchange for seeing his future. In the ritual, Kilrog foresaw that his death was still far away, so he knew that he would survive this disaster. Encouraged by his destiny, he seized control of the clan and led the Bloodring clan to crush the threat of the Crowmen. Then, he won countless battles. In the following years, he slaughtered any dissidents, and even his closest kin couldn't escape the death penalty. He had always hoped that his destiny would come to him step by step. Although orcs were rude and unreasonable, most of them were superstitious. In the current situation where there were no shamans in the tribe's camp, Kilrog's dead eye became quite convincing. Without hesitation, Grom Hellscream, Samuro, and the other high-ranking warriors all agreed to Kilrog's proposal. Orgrim Doomhammer. Are you going to accept, Bagrash, in order to prove your innocence? Kilrog's voice was cold, but it also carried a kind of sharp pressure. It was a terrifying aura that only a warrior who had walked out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood would have. He was old, but no one could deny that he was still one of the strongest warriors in the tribe. I accept. Orgrim stood under the doubtful gazes of countless orcs. Not only do I accept it, but I also request that when you accept, Bagash, you also activate, Makra. Hiss. Countless orcs sucked in a breath of cold air. This meant that Orgrim had to accept challenges from at least 7 chieftain-level warriors while being stabbed 7 times. He could only stop when there were no more challengers. Of course, if Orgrim succeeded, he would become the second great chief of the Horde after Blackhand. Every orc's broad face was filled with unconcealable shock. Either Orgrim was a madman, or he would become the strongest warrior in the history of the Horde. Come! Orgrim suddenly hammered his chest, creating a loud bang. Kilrog didn't say a word. He pulled out a long, curved bone dagger. This bone dagger was at least 30 centimeters long. A white light flashed, and the entire dagger was stabbed diagonally into Orgrim's left collarbone. It pierced through Orgrim's muscles that were as thick as city walls, and came out from the back of his left shoulder blade. Blood splattered everywhere. It was a ghastly sight. Phew. Orgrim didn't even groan in pain. He merely clenched his fists. Grom Hell roared and charged forward. His face was expressionless as he pierced through Orgrim's right arm with his dagger, only avoiding the tendons and bones. Ugh! Orgrim let out a low groan. Swordmaster Samuro of the Fireblade clan followed behind and pierced Orgrim's right thigh with his dagger. Then the 4th, 5th, and 7th warrior went up. Every one of them left a dagger on Orgrim's body. At this moment, Orgrim had become a hedgehog covered in blood. Who is willing to use Orgrim Doomhammer's life to prove their bravery? Who is willing to obtain this, Doomhammer, fair and square? Orgrim's roar was as loud as a bell, and it reverberated in all directions. Not many beast men would be willing to kill a beast man who might be dishonorable unless they could obtain real benefits from him. Coincidentally, Orgrim had it. Not many beast men could resist the temptation of Doomhammer. Especially after Orgrim used it to kill no less than 500 warriors of various races. Ogres, giant lizards, land dragons, and human army commanders. Orgrim used his illustrious battle records to indirectly prove the power of this hammer. Suddenly, a flag was thrown into the middle of the field. I, Galil of the Shattered Sand clan, stake my honor to fight you. Looking at this opponent who was more than a head taller than him, Orgrim was a little disappointed. This was the chief of a small clan with only a few hundred people, but as a suspected traitor, he really couldn't ask for more. In the sky, rolling clouds surged. On the ground, a horn sounded. Whether it was Makara or Bagash, nothing could attract the attention of the beastmen more than the bloodiest and most passionate battle. Only those who dared to face death would be recognized by the beastmen who valued martial arts. Only this most primitive and most unsophisticated battle could truly wash away Orgrim's suspicions. Come! Orgrim roared, and the little chief, Galil, rushed over. Bang! Bang! Galil's heavy footsteps could be heard on the solid ground. Galil's momentum gave people the illusion that a mountain was collapsing. Galil bared his teeth and slashed with his huge machete. It was powerful enough to cut Orgrim in half with one slash. But Orgrim's sharp eyes flashed with a hint of disappointment again. Weak. Too weak. Whether it was strength, speed, or skill, they all disappointed Orgrim. For some reason, he thought of Anduin Lothar, the human who had killed Blackhand the other day. He was clearly at a disadvantage in terms of speed and strength, but Lothar used his perfect unloading techniques and amazing footwork to fight evenly with the great chieftain. Looking at such an opponent, Orgrim didn't even want to wait a second longer. In the eyes of outsiders, he accidentally dropped the heavy hammer of destruction. Only those who knew the ropes could see that he didn't take Galil seriously at all. Just at the moment when the machete was about to fall, Orgrim suddenly exerted force with his intact left leg and rushed into Galil's arms. He punched the enemy's wrist that was holding the machete. The next second, he suddenly clapped his hands. Galil's entire head was instantly smashed in the palm of his hand. It was like a watermelon smashed by a hammer. Orgrim looked up to the sky and shouted, "Next!" Chapter 200. His gigantic hands were stained with blood and colorful brain matter. Orgrim displayed the most primitive, most barbaric violence. The beast men couldn't help but think of their ancestors. When they didn't have any weapons, they used their strong bodies, fists, teeth, and arms to fight against wild beasts. They struggled to survive in the desolate wilderness. Orgrim's most direct attack ignited the passion in every beastman's heart. Oh 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 oh. Orgrim. Orgrim. Just a few minutes ago, these beastmen were still angrily cursing Orgrim. But a few minutes later, Orgrim, who displayed his bravery and power, immediately became the brightest star of the entire tribe. Kilrog Deadeye opened his seemingly turbid right eye and said slowly, "Orgrim Doomhammer, you have cleared your name and restored your reputation. Now, if you want to leave, Makara, it is not too late." Orgrim used his actions to answer. With blood-stained steps, he took down a flag from a tent at the side of the field. That was the flag of the Blackrock tribe that belonged to him, Doomhammer. With a swing of his hand, the red and black war flag landed in the middle of the field. I, Orgrim Doomhammer. From here on, Makara, I challenge for the position of Great Chief. I will accept challenges from at least 6 warriors. Until I ascend to the position of Great Chief, or death. Even though he was stabbed multiple times, even though every wound was still bleeding as Orgrim moved, Orgrim's soul-stirring roar still spread throughout the camp. Ho! 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 This was the rhythmic cheering of the beastmen. Nothing made their blood boil more than a blood-soaked warrior participating in the battle for the position of Great Chief. No matter how much they didn't want to admit it, it was an indisputable fact that the tribe had just won a Pyrrhic victory. The weak humans were far more cunning than the beastmen imagined. The entire tribe urgently needed a true king who could lead the tribe to conquer this planet. The orcs shouted and praised loudly. They raised the crude weapons in their hands high and stomped the ground with both feet, as if they wanted the earth to tremble and let the earth cheer and welcome the possible new great chieftain that was about to appear. A clan flag with 3 teeth on it was thrown into the field. It was a Blade Fang clan with 1,000 warriors. As a small clan, the chief of Blade Fang clan, Ramlin, was not a very strong orc. Among the beastmen, he was definitely small and skinny. He made up for his lack of strength with his high agility. Orgrim, Ramlin roared loudly, but his movements were reminiscent of a nimble lynx. Ramlin aimed at Orgrim's injured right leg and moved at high speed with Orgrim's injured leg as the axis. Orgrim was indeed affected. The moment he turned around and couldn't keep up, Ramlin pounced on him. 2 crossed scimitars flashed in the air, and Orgrim's broad back was instantly marked with a bloody red cross. His skin and flesh were torn open by the barbs on the scimitars. It was a ghastly sight. Just as Ramlin was about to retreat, Orgrim counterattacked. Under the sunlight, the heavy hammer of destruction shone with a black light as it spun. There was no technique involved, only speed. It was unbelievably fast. It was insanely fast. It was a speed that surpassed what Ramlin could capture with his naked eye. In less than a blink of an eye, his slightly slender body was split in half by a single powerful blow, as if he had been chopped by an incomparably huge machete. Time seemed to have frozen. Ramlin's chest and lower body were still floating in the air, but his abdomen that was hit instantly exploded into a rain of flesh and bone, exploding in the direction of the hammer's strike. After what seemed like 3 seconds, Ramlin's eyes, which were still filled with disbelief, fell into a pool of blood along with his eyeball. Killing with 1 strike, domineering. Next. Orgrim's loud voice was no different from a drum in the orc's ears. Another flag was thrown into the field. A minute later, another wound appeared on Orgrim's shoulder, and another corpse appeared on the ground. Next. It was the same killing with 1 strike, the same voice, and the same tone that never changed. But with the corpses of the 3 tribal chiefs as the foundation, Orgrim's shout had a different meaning. The tribal chiefs who thought that they were the weaker ones replied with silence. At this moment, there was no longer any hope in their hearts. Even though the orcs who were watching were all fired up. There was a short silence among the people who were qualified to participate in Makegara. Half a minute later, the 4th flag was thrown. 3 minutes later, the 5th flag. 10 minutes later, the 6th flag. By the time the 7th flag was thrown into the arena, Orgrim was already covered in blood. No one could tell if it was Orgrim's blood or his enemies'. None of the 6 tribal chiefs had a complete corpse, all of them had turned into bloody chunks of flesh. From an unknown little chieftain to the chieftain of a clan with tens of thousands of people. The challengers were leveling up step by step, and Orgrim's injuries were worsening as well. Now, anyone who went up had to weigh their own strength first. When the 7th flag was thrown, a black-skinned orc without a left hand came out. Below his left arm was a long scimitar. It was not because he lost his left hand in the war, but because he was a warrior of the Broken Palm tribe. As one of the cruelest and fiercest tribes in the tribe, the Broken Palm tribe's tradition was to cripple their left hand and replace it with a sharp blade. They were prepared to go through fire and water for the tribe's glory. Orgrim, you are indeed powerful, but your path as a great tribal chief will end with me, Kunad Bladefist. The tribes were also divided into different ranks. Only the tribal chiefs had the right to challenge, but in the big tribes, the publicly recognized warriors also had the right to challenge Makegra. For example, in the history, Orgrim challenged Blackhand as the deputy of the Blackrock tribe's chief. This was equivalent to the deputy chief, and he successfully killed Blackhand. Glancing at Kunad Bladefist, Orgrim's boorish face showed some disdain. If you can't do it, let your chief Kargath do it. Humph. You are tired. You are heavily injured. Orgrim. Kunad suddenly took a step forward. With your temperament, you are only fit to take advantage of heavily injured opponents. The mockery on Orgrim's face intensified. Yes. I am tired, I am injured, but even if there are 1,000 of you, I can still kill them all. Chapter 201. The crowd had thought that they had reached the peak a long time ago, but who would have thought that after Orgrim's words, an even higher peak that seemed to have appeared out of thin air behind that unsurpassable peak. The sound waves reverberated in the sky for hundreds and thousands of times. The entire tribe's camp, and even the entire land, were shaking violently. What kind of heroic spirit was this? As long as one's life was not spared, the bloody battle would not end. Not long ago, no one looked favorably upon Orgrim, the assistant of Blackhand. But now, every single beast man had a different view of him. His gaze was filled with intense admiration. No, this was no longer admiration, it was worship. Orgrim, Orgrim, the roars of thousands of beast men stirred up the emotions of all the beast men in the tribe's camp. Although the beast men in the distance could not see what was happening, they could hear their leader's voice and knew that perhaps, a new great chieftain was about to be born. Kunad pounced over. Orgrim said that he looked down on Kunad, but in his heart, he put in 120% of his effort. No one from the Broken Palm clan was easy to provoke. The Broken Palm clan originated from the beast men who were enslaved by the ogres. This group of beast men were imprisoned by the ogres in a huge, rough, and incomparably sturdy circular arena as gladiators. Every day, they would fight non-stop to entertain the ogres and other, higher races. This was the sole purpose of these beastman gladiators' existence. The ogres promised that as long as any beastman's slave killed 100 beastmen in the arena, they would obtain freedom. Kunad's brother, Kargath Bladefist did it. However, what the ogres gave Kargath was not freedom, but the fate of being imprisoned in an underground prison that never saw the light of day until his death. Kargath was imprisoned in the underground prison, his left hand secured to the prison pillar by a steel handcuff. In order to break free from the handcuffs, Kargath chose to destroy his own left hand. Kargath led the beastman's slaves who also chose to give up their left hand and use their sharp fists instead. They fought like the slaves of Spartacus before Duce's transmigration against the Roman Empire. They killed the ogres who had enslaved them. Kargath carried the head of the ogre leader and announced the formation of a new clan. A clan that yearned for freedom and fought for it, the Shattered Palm clan. Therefore, this batch of Shattered Palm tribe's orcs were all super elites who had killed their way through mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Just one charge from Kunad was enough for Orgrim to realize that this wasn't an opponent he could deal with unscathed. From the corner of his eyes, Orgrim glanced at a few famous chieftains or heroes who were watching coldly from the side, Grom Hellscream, Kilrog Deadeye, Samuro. Orgrim wasn't sure if the strongest of these tribes had any intentions of making a move. But he had to prepare for the worst. He had to end the battle quickly. Kunad was also holding a war hammer in his right hand. It wasn't as big as Destroyer Hammer, just a little smaller, but Orgrim didn't dare to underestimate it. It was the same hammering, but Kunad's movements gave off a solid feeling as if he had been hammered thousands of times. He stepped forward, raised his left arm, swung his right arm, and suddenly exerted force. At first glance, it didn't seem surprising at all. Only warriors who had been through countless battles would notice that Kanad didn't make any extra movements. Whether it was the angle, strength, or speed, they were all exquisite to the extreme. Moreover, it gave Orgrim enough time to change his attack. Without a choice, Orgrim also raised his hammer and clashed with Kanad's hammer. Clang! The clanging sound of the two largest hammers clashing almost broke the eardrums of the spectating orcs. The buzzing sound of metal caused most of the orcs to cover their ears. No one expected Kanad to suddenly throw away the hammer in his hand and stab with his left hand. His left arm was his killing move. After closing the distance, the scimitar that was as long as a human's arm had unimaginable agility. Although Orgrim's destroyer hammer was sharp, such a large hammer was never a good defensive weapon. In the next moment, the unique scimitar of the Shattered Palm tribe was about to pierce into Orgrim's chest. At this moment, a huge hand the size of a palm leaf fan suddenly blocked in front of the scimitar. Puk. Blood splashed everywhere. The sharp blade easily pierced through Orgrim's left palm and into his chest. However, it was unable to pierce into his heart. Orgrim's left palm suddenly clenched tightly. Even though his palm was pierced, he still managed to hold on to the bottom part of the scimitar, which was his arm. Gotcha! Orgrim's voice had an indescribable coldness in it. Canard wanted to retreat, but the giant hand held onto his arm tightly. Since both of them were so close, using a big hammer was just a joke. There wasn't enough distance for him to exert his strength. It was too close. Orgrim had a more direct way. Just like what Kanad did with his right hand, he threw away his destroyer hammer, almost at the same time. His right hand turned into a hammer and pierced Kanad's throat. Cough! Kanad's muffled voice was the last sound he made in this world. At the next moment, Orgrim turned his finger into a hook and pierced Kanad's throat. Simple. Violent. Full of barbaric aesthetics. This was the beastman's love, this was the beastman's worship. Oh, 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 oh. The boiling sound waves surged into the sky and seemed to cross countless light years and the endless void to reach planet Draenor. He withdrew his left hand from the scimitar and kicked away Canard, who was about to lose his life and become a corpse. Orgrim raised his fists and roared for the 7th time. Who? Who else? Orgrim looked at the faces of the strongest existences in the horde, Grom, Kilrog, Samuro. With his body riddled with scars, Orgrim dared to say that he wouldn't have more than a 50% chance of winning against any one of them. But it was impossible for him to back down, and he would not back down. This was not only because of his life and his glory, but also because he felt that he was shouldering the last request of his good friend, Durotan. He shouldered the heavy responsibility of leading the tribe to a path of survival in this strange and unfriendly world. Apart from the passion in his eyes, there was only clarity. Orgrim's godlike eyes scanned the faces of the experts in the tribe one by one. There was no provocation. All he saw was obedience. One of the experts lowered his head. 2 of the experts lowered their heads. 3, 10. When Orgrim saw Samuro's face, Samuro punched his chest with one hand. This was the etiquette for meeting the great chief. Kilrog and Grom looked at each other. Kilrog said, "My Deadeye saw that Orgrim shouldn't die here. I won't sacrifice my life for an irreversible fate." With that, Kilrog bowed as well. Grom said, "I am very satisfied with my position as the Warsong tribe chief." With that, he bowed as well. At this point, the second great chief of the horde was born. Chapter 202. Caer Daroshir, northeast of the Hillsbrad Hills. The Bear of Family's castle was located on a beautiful island surrounded by water. The beautiful Lake Daromir was the castle's most beautiful scenery, and also the best moat. The southern side of the island was relatively flat, and this was where the essence of the Bear of Family's industry was gathered. Large blacksmiths were connected to each other, and thick chimneys were constantly emitting black smoke. People came and went on the island, and the merchants' caravans were endless. On the western side of the island, there was a large port that was clearly not for civilian use. Duque actually saw a small warship here, which was obviously used by the Berev family to protect their home. The island was not completely separated from the shore. There was a 200-meter-long stone bridge that could accommodate 4 carriages side by side that connected the island to the shore. The lake was not deep, and the water was about 2 meters deep, allowing people to see the bottom through the clear water. Of course, there were at least 10 cannons on the fortress that protected the entire Berev family's castle, and their muzzles were facing the shore. If someone really led an army to kill their way through the narrow mountain road, it would be a real-life shooting practice. No one from the attacking army would be able to cross the bridge alive. Duque stood on his horse on the shore. If not for Duque's transmigration, this prosperous island would have become a deathly silent and terrifying place in a few decades. The entire Berev family would have been destroyed, and this place would have been occupied by Thuzad's cursing sect. It would have become a very famous place in the future, Scholomance. Duque would never forget how he and his companions were wiped out time and time again in the game. He could remember every single point after they were wiped out. Duque suddenly sighed. "Master, what's wrong?" Makarov asked Duque attentively. "Nothing, it's just a little boring." At this time, one of Duque's private soldiers rushed back. "Report, there seems to be some trouble ahead." Makarov suddenly frowned. "Didn't we already inform him that His Excellency would come to visit?" "That's right, but a caravan suddenly overturned their carriage on the bridge, dumping a large amount of goods and attracting cattle, sheep, and animals. Now the only bridge to the island is blocked. The Berev family said they were very sorry and asked us to wait for a while," the private soldier said. Makarov's face was as dark as ink. "What about the ferry?" "They were all sent out before we made the announcement." "What mistake?" This was clearly a show of strength. "Master, Duque didn't mind at all. Instead, he laughed. Ha! Berev and his men really think we're beggars. I'm going to blast those guys on the bridge." Makarov was furious. He waved his hand to summon his private soldiers, ready to rush over and push everything in their way into the water. "No need." Duque pointed his horsewhip at the castle on the island. "I want to tell Berev that before I became a duke, I was first a powerful mage, and Stormwind is not dead. Pass the order, change the horseshoes." Horseshoes. Horseshoes could protect the horse's hooves from cracking, but horseshoes were only used in a world of ice and snow. Fortunately, the troops came along the edge of the snow-covered Alterac Mountains, so they were prepared for horseshoes. It didn't take long for the horseshoes to be changed. Meanwhile, in Berev's castle, Alex Berev received a report from his subordinates. They stopped. Yes. They stopped before they even got close to the bridge. "Let's leave them hanging. I don't mean to humiliate them, but I don't want to see this young duke opening his mouth. In troubled times, food is very precious." At that moment, hurried footsteps came from outside the door. It was another of Berev's personal attendants. "Duke, they're here. Duke Marcus and his men are here." Berev frowned. His personal attendant rarely lost his composure. If it was a normal arrival, he wouldn't have made such a fuss and run over breathlessly. Moreover, Duque had used some kind of unexpected method to cross 100 meters of water. "They're here." "How did they get here?" "Ice. That Marcus froze the lake." Hearing his subordinate's report, Duke Berev quickly left the room and went to the other side of the castle, which was a terrace close to the bridge to the south. He saw a scene that he would never forget. Above his head, the warm sun. In front of him, a kilometer of ice. Darlong Mill Lake, which Caer Darrow Castle relied on as a barrier, was completely frozen. A group of people galloped on the slippery ice, heading straight for the castle. The rumbling of the horses alarmed countless people who were working on the island. Not far away, Duke Berev saw that his guard captain was stupefied. He clearly held the alarm bell in his hand, yet he didn't know whether to ring it or not to ring it. Fortunately, at the last moment, the captain saw Duke Berev. The Duke heaved a long sigh and made a beckoning gesture. The captain was relieved. Open the gate. Welcome, distinguished guest. In fact, in order to pretend to be in a hurry, the gate was always open. However, having guards lined up to welcome him was completely different from not having guards lined up. As if he was waiting for the guards to line up, the moment the Berev family's private army finished lining up and blew the welcome horn, Duke arrived. Duke knocked on the horse's belly, and a tall, pure white steed galloped over the frozen lake. At this moment, Duke did not look like a mortal at all against the backdrop of the falling snow. He wore a white mage crown with purple patterns on the top and a white stormwind robe with blue edges, fluttering in the wind. At his waist was a belt brimming with a baleful aura and exuding a mysterious blue arcane radiance. At his waist was a strange ornament faintly flickering with lightning, which was even more dazzling. The pure white cloak he wore fluttered in the wind and snow, and the golden rune patterns embroidered on the cloak could be vaguely seen. Although he looked like a gentle and elegant young man, he gave people the feeling that he was a god who walked out of the snowstorm. Stepping on the ice, Duke's warhorse neighed even more. However, this appearance startled Duke Berev, who came out to welcome him. Next to him, Makarov grabbed the reins of his horse, jumped off lightly, and immediately announced, Duke Marcus, the court mage of Stormwind, the Duke of Karazhan, the destroyer of hundreds of thousands of orcs. Next to him, 4 carriages were lined up. Duke's private army quickly opened the boxes in the carriages. 2 carriages of golden bars, and 2 carriages of frozen orc heads. Duke Berev's eyelids twitched. Chapter 203. Duke Berev was not young. In his life, he had seen many different kinds of people. There were thieves, bandits, trolls, and nobles. He had never seen a person so domineering and overbearing. But he was not blindly domineering. At least he came with wealth. Give my friends wealth, and give my enemies death. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at the long carriages behind Duke. Even if he did not want to admit it, Duke Berev had to say, this little guy is well prepared. Recalling the information on Duke Marcus, the boy who rose miraculously, Berev felt a headache. He was too young, and his status was too high. If Duke was a title passed down from his ancestors, Duke Berev could still treat Duke like a junior. But obviously, Duke was not. Last summer, at the age of 14, he was selected to become a magic apprentice at the Storm Royal Magic Academy in the East County Abbey. In the same year, at the admission ceremony, he became an official Earth Mage with unparalleled talent and rejected the request of Medivh, the guardian of Azeroth, to take him as a disciple. Later, it turned out that Duke was right, because he was sensitive to Medivh's demonic aura. That was not all. In the next few months, he single-handedly conquered a small Naga clan from somewhere and controlled nearly 10,000 murlocs. He opened up a route between Stormwind City and the Western Wilderness in one fell swoop, and opened up a pearl route that earned tens of thousands of dollars a day. But there was still more to come. When Medivh was controlled by Sargeras and opened the Dark Portal, Duke, who was only 15 years old, fought his way into Karazhan with the famous Anduin Lothar, killed Medivh, and kicked Sargeras into the bottomless abyss. After that, whether it was burning 100,000 beastmen, luring and killing the tribal chief, or using a huge ice ship to rescue 50,000 Stormwind Kingdom's elite soldiers, everything Duke did could be called a miracle. Unfortunately, there were a lot of witnesses and material evidence for everything, so there was no room for any falsification. No, it should be said that the scene of the frozen sea was witnessed by Duke Berev himself. This was indeed, that's amazing. Master Marcus, how did you seal the lake's surface with ice? How is the energy output of the ice elemental realm balanced? What about magic coordination? A spell? Is it purely the ice element, or is it combined with the arcana element? Hearing the familiar female voice beside him, Duke Berev felt a headache. Ah. Sorry, I'm so excited. I haven't introduced myself. I am Janice Berev, mistress of the Berev family. Of course, before that, I was a sky mage. The junior sister of Dalaran's archmage Antonidas. The elegant lady sold Duke Berev out completely the moment she opened her mouth. That's right. Magic first or husband first? Was there a need to ask? Of course it was magic. Ignoring the black lines on her husband's forehead, Madame Janice, like a fan, approached Duque, who had just dismounted from the horse, and asked him about this and that. Well, before the negotiations started, the Berev family had already lost 20%. Duke Berev was embarrassed and could only cough twice. Dear, don't you think it is very rude to leave an honored guest at the door? Yes, yes. Let's go inside and talk. Janice was so enthusiastic that she almost pulled Duque's hand and dragged Duque inside. Stepping through the huge gate of the castle, Duque gazed at the castle, which was shrouded in flourishing greenery in midsummer, and suddenly felt a myriad of emotions. It turned out that this place was so beautiful before it became Scholamen's College. As a great aristocrat of noble birth, wealth, power, and influence, it was certainly impossible for him to live on a bare stone island. As the owner of the castle, the Berev family had obviously carefully selected the trees on the island. They would not be too tall, which would be an obstacle to their defense, and would also be able to ensure lush greenery most of the time. If there was anything that this castle touched Duque, it was that he had a feeling of nostalgia. Once upon a time, as a university student with corrupt ideals, he also thought that one day when he became rich, he would buy a villa for vacation or something. With his status as a duke and his current wealth, he could definitely do this. Unfortunately, since he had come to Azeroth, the concept of a stable home, which was a very common concept in peaceful times, was now distant and unfamiliar to Duque, as if it had nothing to do with him. If it was not for the series of crises that would follow in Azeroth, which would cause the whole world to be embroiled in destruction and rebirth, perhaps this castle would have been Duque's ultimate goal. Looking at every detail in this prosperous and serene castle, Duque suddenly wondered if he should transform Karazhan at some point. Walking along the spacious and brightly decorated corridor, Duke Berev's gate was 9 streets ahead of Duque's. His shoulders were straight and did not sway at all. His slightly raised chin did not make people feel that he was too arrogant, and he appeared to be quite confident. Every step he took seemed to have been measured with a ruler, not 1 inch more, not 1 inch less. In terms of aristocratic etiquette, this real duke was much, much better than Duque, who had crossed over to the front line. Duque was very clear that if he did not make a comeback, there would be no need to talk when it came to the negotiation table. This was not an exaggeration. The secret of negotiation was that the success of a negotiation depended on how much preparation you had done before sitting at the negotiation table. You had to use what you had and what the other party wanted to whet the other party's appetite. If you lost too much before sitting at the negotiation table, no matter how much effort you put in, it would be looked down upon and disregarded. He wanted to pry open the Berev family's treasure chest and take out the most valuable thing in the treasure chest, food. First, he had to grasp the Berev family's weak spot. If he could not do this, any groveling, kneeling, and crying would be meaningless. Unless he led an army to rob it, he would not be able to get a single grain from the Berev family's granary. Fortunately, Duque knew what to do next. Of course, before that, Duque gently activated his magic circuit. This was definitely a common thing among mages. Many mages like to continuously absorb the elemental molecules in the atmosphere, and even gradually condense the purer magic power into better circuits to replace the old or broken circuits in their bodies. But what Duque did was a little exaggerated. In just a second, Duque had scanned all the magic traps within a 300-meter radius with the system elf. Lady Janice could clearly feel that in that instant, the magic traps and magic circles that she had originally controlled all deviated slightly. It was not that she did not want to regain absolute control of these magic circles, but the magic circles seemed to be afraid of her and cowered away from her. She suddenly realized that as long as Duque wanted to, his uncontrollable power would dominate and take over everything in an instant. Chapter 204. For a moment, Janice tried to regain control of everything and regroup the magic traps in a short time. But the Princess Berev soon gave up, feeling a disagreeable sensation which was at once familiar and strange to her. God, Duque, you remind me of Antonidas. This old brother of his makes me feel so helpless. Even though Janice had her hands on her hips and was lecturing a junior, Duke Berev was still shocked to hear his proud wife compare Duque to Antonidas. Just now. Duke Berev could not hide the shock on his face. The magic defense system I painstakingly set up was seen through by him in one glance. Not only here, but also those in your dormitory. I told you, with my level of skill, I can only defend against petty thieves. I can't defend against a true master. In front of a true archmage, setting up such a clumsy magic trap would reveal the location of the trap in advance. Janice scolded her husband without holding back. Sorry, I was hit by the magic trap and overreacted. Duque raised his head slightly. There was a lightning magic trap hidden on top of the gorgeous chandelier. As long as Janice willed it, or pressed a switch in a secret passage at the side of the corridor, the entire 20-meter-long corridor would be baptized by lightning. Duque's sincere apology made Duke Berev even more embarrassed. All right. Our guest must be hungry after coming all the way here. Let's eat first. In the beautiful dining hall, Duque, who was sitting at a long table that could seat 10 people, fell into a new dilemma. Western etiquette was quite complicated. Unfortunately, Duque's understanding of it was limited to holding a fork in his left hand, a knife in his right, and not talking while eating. Then, when Duque saw the elegant butler place a large number of spoons and forks of different sizes beside his plate, Duque was dumbfounded. The habits of nobles were quite troublesome. If he took the wrong thing, he would be looked down upon. Duque didn't have the chance to cram on this knowledge. Similarly, because he didn't have this knowledge in his head, the system elf couldn't save him. When Duque felt the Duke and Duchess looking at him, Duque suddenly felt glad that the Duchess was a mage and quite obsessed with him. Did you know? Mrs. Berev, in fact, low-level spells are very helpful in training one's multicasting ability. Oh. Janice's eyes lit up. This was multiple casting. Countless people had practiced metamagic abilities for a long time without being able to develop any. But everyone knew that a mage who was good at casting multiple spells could definitely take on 2 or 3 mages of the same level. Janice had also heard some rumors about Duque. My teacher is Huijia, the 100-handed reaper. In fact, I learned the rarest way to train my multicasting ability from my teacher. Since we hit it off so well, I might as well introduce you to each other. Oh, my little Duque is the best. Hurry up and teach me. If I really learn it, I'll help you bully my old man at the negotiating table. As soon as she said that, Duke Berev's hand froze in the middle of reaching for the spoon. He had always known that his wife was a magic maniac. Back then, Janice, who was beautiful and noble, was absolutely loved by everyone. Thinking back to the time when he, handsome and elegant, finally plucked the Dalijan rose with all his magic treasures, it was something he was proud of for decades, both for his feelings and for his career. He didn't expect that after decades, because of magic, for the first time, he would feel like he was tricked by his wife. Duke Berev was really speechless. Don't worry, dear, it won't be too hard for you. Janice symbolically comforted her husband and then looked at Duque without blinking. Duque made an apologetic expression to Duke Berev and then activated Hands of Magic. When the 12 hands of magic appeared, they simultaneously helped Duque tie the napkin, cut the food, swirled the wine, poured it into his mouth, and wiped his mouth with the napkin. After a series of dazzling magic performances, who would pay attention to whether Duque used the right spoon or knife? Duque even instigated, Duchess, you can start with the 2 simplest hands of magic and let the 2 additional hands of magic help you complete the actions of daily life. After a while, you'll find that you can easily multitask. Hands of Magic was, of course, the simplest level 0 spell. It was when a mage focused all their attention on one hand of magic. When using 2 or 4 hands at the same time, the mental power required was completely geometrically increased. But it was undeniable that this method could indeed train one's ability to cast multiple spells. Seeing that his wife was easily bought over, Duke Berev also looked helpless. Soon, this somewhat ceremonially ridiculous meal was over. To Duke's surprise, Duke Berev actually agreed to immediately start the negotiations in the afternoon. Originally, Duke thought that Duke Berev would deliberately give him the cold shoulder. In a private meeting hall, the lights were brightly lit. Duke Berev sat on one side of the conference table. Beside him was a secretary, and behind him stood 2 guards who were obviously experts. On Duke's side, there was only one attendant, Makarov. Duke Berev clasped his hands together, his chin resting on the back of his fingers. He immediately got to the point. Duke Marcus, I have to admit that I have underestimated you. Your talent in the field of magic is unparalleled, and your wisdom is also evident in negotiations. Janice is my darling, and her pressure forced me to open this negotiation in a passive position. But I hope you understand that personal feelings are not the main factor in this negotiation. The Berev family does have the food that Stormwind urgently needs. I just want to ask, if the Berev family takes out the food that is equivalent to the family's lifeline as a bargaining chip, what will the Berev family get? Duke did not hesitate, safety, and the continuation of the Berev family. Duke Berev immediately frowned, obviously thinking of something bad. Duke flipped his left palm. Don't misunderstand, the swords of the Stormwind warriors will never be pointed at humans. I think it is necessary for me to educate you on the destructive power of the beast men. Prince Berev made a gesture of invitation. Duke cast a spell that looked like magic mirror. Duke Berev saw this and was immediately moved. Chapter 205. In this era, there were no video recorders. No matter how good the magic mirror spell was, it could only transmit current events, which was to use magic to make a live broadcast. It was also affected by distance, elemental fluctuations, and a series of other factors, making it quite unstable. If one were to say that recording a certain event was in the realm of the bronze dragons, who could control space and time. Among the humans, even the most famous astral mage, Mediv, only had a deep understanding of space. What Duke was doing now was completely beyond Duke Berev's imagination. 3-dimensional projection. Before Duke's transmigration, the true meaning of holographic projection technology had not yet been formed. But the wise and far-sighted humans had already built a huge triangular cone made up of 4 triangular pieces of glass, and through the combination of projections in 4 directions, it became a true 3-dimensional projection. Duke's system elf also extracted Duke's knowledge in this area, and replayed the memories imprinted in Duke's mind in the most 3-dimensional and realistic way. It was the Battle of Red Ridge Mountain. Duke Berev only saw, in the projection, a green tide suddenly surging from the other side of the mountain. More than 10,000 orc warriors surged from the mountain passes and mountain ridges towards the human camp. He only saw a huge orc among the orcs raise half of his body and roar towards the sky. His braided hair spread out in the wind, and together with that shocking roar, it was awe-inspiring. The orcs were split in 2 amidst the rumbling of the earth. This terrifying green tide drowned the entire mountainside in a few blinks of an eye. The surging tide was sniped by the arrows shot by the human fortresses, but it was meaningless. Instead, it aroused the orcs' ferocity. They turned into the most terrifying destructive demons, easily attacking the fortresses, using the most brutal method to break through the thick mud walls, and dragging out the humans hiding in the fortresses and tearing them to pieces. The scene changed, and showed the orcs attacking the eastern and northern walls of Stormwind City. They also did not care about their lives, using their flesh and blood to resist the rain of javelins and ballistae. The green tide drowned the walls. Unknowingly, Duke Berev's entire back was soaked in cold sweat. Is this thing real? Can you demonstrate it again? Can I ask my wife to watch it? Prince Berev asked 3 questions in a row. Duke only had one answer. Sure. In fact, when Duke replayed the scene, Duchess Berev, who had rushed over after hearing the news, was even more shocked. One was an orc, and the other was a magician. However, Lady Janice managed to suppress her curiosity in the field of magic very well. "Dear, I have to say, this should be true," Duque calmly said. "In fact, I also prepared an orc warrior as a captive. I put him to sleep. However, you can let your guards test the strength of the beast men. Of course, you have to be mentally prepared for the sacrifice of your subordinates." Duke Berev nodded gravely. Half an hour later, Prince Berev and his wife returned to the negotiating table with ashen faces. The results were too shocking. Even though Duque had repeatedly emphasized the strength of the orcs, Duke Berev had sent 5 fully armed men to deal with an unarmed orc, and Duke Berev's side had paid the price of 1 dead and 2 seriously injured to kill the orc. "But, those damned orcs can't pass through Zephyr Bridge," Duke Berev argued. Zephyr Bridge, this huge stone bridge that connected the 2 continents, was indeed a natural stronghold. Duque was also quite speechless about this huge cable bridge. This should not have appeared in a world that seemed to be set in the Middle Ages on Earth, with magic and swords as its core. Don't forget, planet Azeroth was the experimental factory of the Titans of creation, so a lot of black technology was set aside. At least when the dwarves already had steam-powered tanks, humans were still using swords. Of course, those huge tanks were also unreliable. For example, their endurance was terrible, and they would collapse after 1 or 2 kilometers. This did not stop the people here from having all sorts of strange confidence. Duque did not directly refute. He just quietly took out a rough map of the northern continent of the Eastern Kingdom, pointed lightly, and then drew a line from right to left. Duke Berev had already admitted defeat in his heart, but he still did not give up. He finally asked, "Are you sure those green beasts can drive the ships?" Duque nodded silently. Even though the Horde's ships looked like a huge pile of garbage floating on the sea, and he could not agree with the orcs' crude and terrible aesthetics, there was no doubt that the Horde's ships could indeed pass through the sea. Duke Berev and his wife did not look very good. What Duque had just pointed out was the hinterlands in the east of the northern continent. The Horde would disembark from the coast at the easternmost part of the hinterlands, at the bottom of the Seaview Cliff. From east to west across the entire hinterlands, they would arrive at the Berev family's territory. The Berev family was indeed huge, but it was a pity that they were geographically long. From South Shore in the southwest, all the way to Caer Darrow in the northeast. In a sense, if the Horde really invaded along the route Duque had pointed out, the Berev family would also act as a barrier for the Alterac royal family. Attacking in advance or setting up defenses would also be troublesome. After all, most of the hinterlands was covered in dense primeval forests, and that was the territory of the trolls who had been fighting against the humans for 1,000 years. Even after spending 1,000 years, the humans still could not completely eradicate the trolls from the hinterlands. The scariest thing was that Duque also said, "I bet that when the Horde can't cross the Zephyr Bridge, they will look for other routes. The hinterlands will be their first choice. And the great chief of the Horde will definitely do everything possible to pull the trolls into the Horde's camp. So by next year, the Berev family will very likely have to face the Horde's allied army." This time, Duke Berev and his wife were completely at ease. The Berev family was indeed wealthy, but military affairs had never been their strong suit. They had always had a complementary relationship with the Alterac royal family. But after seeing how strong the Horde was in the mountains, the Berev family no longer had any hope that the Alterac kingdom could withstand the Horde's attack. After all, before the Alterac kingdom entered a state of total war, the regular army only had a mere 4,000 people. Among them, there were only 500 cavalrymen. If the video provided by Duque was real, the Alterac kingdom did not have the slightest chance of withstanding the Horde's attack, even if it was just a Horde army coming from the hinterlands. At this time, Duque suddenly added fuel to the fire. If the Horde comes from the hinterlands, who can the Berev family rely on? The Riptide fortress that is busy defending the bridge? The Dalajan that is practicing isolationism? The Lordaeron that is thousands of miles away? Or the 50,000 Stormwind elite soldiers that have experience fighting against the orcs in South Shore. Chapter 206. If it were not for Duque's video and the orcs' bloody battles, Duke Berev would have scoffed at Duque's 50,000 elite soldiers. In this era, the so-called rumors always had too much of an exaggeration. 100,000 soldiers. It would be good enough if there were 30,000 soldiers. Of course, the nobles and generals of this era were also used to counting peasant soldiers who had little fighting power and would go to the battlefield with pitchforks. They even counted auxiliary soldiers who helped transport food. After feeling the threat of the orcs so clearly, Duke Berev's view of Duque and the Stormwind behind Duque changed greatly. Encountering such a terrifying and organized barbarian race who could protect so many citizens and elite soldiers, Duke Berev felt that it was a miracle. Duque saw that Duke Berev was tempted. A very sincere smile appeared on Duque's face. Of course, this is only a possible future. There is no absolute certainty that the horde will come from the hinterlands. But, Duke, don't you think that selling food in exchange for my personal friendship with Stormwind, His Majesty Rin, and me is a very good deal? At this time, Duque raised 3 fingers. On behalf of Stormwind, I propose to purchase 5,000 tons of wheat at a premium of 30% over the current market price, and it will be paid in Arather gold coins. At the same time, as a symbol of personal friendship, I can unconditionally transfer the exclusive rights of the New Pearl Line in the Hillbrad Hills and Arather Highlands to you. Duke Berev's expression was one of shock. Duque was too smart. 5,000 tons was exactly the total amount of the Berev family's old wheat. Duke Berev wouldn't believe it even if he was beaten to death to say that Duke didn't secretly gather intelligence. In this era, storage technology was also quite bad. Even if the grain was stored in a cool, dry cave, it would rot in at most 3 years. Of course, Duke Berev knew that as refugees, it was good enough to fill their stomachs. But 5,000 tons of old grain in exchange for a large amount of money and Stormwind's friendship was not a bad deal. Prince Berev could not think of any reason why he should refuse, either from a commercial point of view, or as an insurance for the future. Duque stood up and stretched out his right hand. Dear Duke, for the future of the Stormwind people, and for the future of all humans in Azeroth, please agree to help. As a best actor, as a leader who was likely to control the future of humanity, Duque's smile was very sincere, at least on the surface. Duke Berev and his wife looked at each other and sighed deeply. They stood up together and extended their hands to Duque. Even though I still have many doubts about the strength of the horde and the direction of their attack, even though I am not a prophet who can see the future, I choose to believe in you, the person who created such an atmosphere in order to successfully negotiate. I believe in you, the person who has such spirit. I agree to this. As the dust settled, Makarov's heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally settled down. Makarov did not participate in the final defense of Stormwind City. He had been sent to take care of the refugee camp in South Shore. If Edwin Van Cleef was only in charge of the construction department, then before Duque's arrival, he was the real person in charge. Duque had done a lot of preparatory work for the refugee camp in South Shore, from the delineation of residential and functional areas, to water, sanitation, and security. Duque had drawn no less than 50 blueprints for this. But the most important thing, food, had not been settled. As the number of refugees increased day by day, the food hoarded in South Shore decreased at a visible rate. Even if each refugee could only get 2 pitifully small pieces of black bread a day, it still could not reduce the rate of food consumption. After all, the number of refugees had increased by nearly 10,000 every day. Now, Duque had negotiated the food deal. At long last, the urgent matter had been resolved. Patriarch Berev smiled and clasped Duque's hand tightly. Duke Marcus, I still have to discuss this matter with His Majesty. If there are no surprises, it won't be a problem. Eden will listen to my opinion most of the time. Actually, what I want the most is your personal friendship. Alex Berev was indeed a shrewd old man, and Duque could tell the meaning behind his words. only a small number of people could call the king by his name. Just like now, only Andoan and the Queen of Lang would call the King of Lang as Lang. The fact that Duke Berev could call King Alterac by his name was a subtle reminder of the special relationship between him and the king. As someone who knew the direction of history, Duque naturally wouldn't say it out loud. He said to Duke Berev with incomparable familiarity, "I think so too. How about Uncle Alex, just call me Duque from now on. I'll feel much more comfortable that way. Duque, Uncle is very happy to meet you." After saying that, the two foxes had already left the negotiation table, and were passionately hugging each other's shoulders. While Duque's negotiation had made decisive progress, Lang's negotiation had reached a stalemate. No, it should be said that there was no progress at all. In the guest house of Rotterdam, Lothar kept pacing around, and finally punched the solid wall. "Bastard! How many days has it been? Menethil too actually refused to meet us." Lothar's anger was justified. He and Lang had been in Rotterdam for 3 days. After the division of the Arathar Empire, Turina's Menethil II, the king of Lordaeron, the strongest of the 7 human kingdoms, refused to meet King Leon, using his illness as an excuse. Calm down, Andoan. A meeting between kings is not as simple as you think. Lang sat upright on the chair, and casually took a sip of black tea. But the tribe is getting stronger every day. The Griffin Knights and spies I left on the other side of the sea have discovered that the dark portal has been reopened. Large numbers of orcs continue to pour into this world, but the king of Rotterdam refuses to meet us. And that stupid Duke, he looks at us like we're beggars. Lothar couldn't control his temper. King Lang put down his exquisite teacup. A king who has lost his kingdom is indeed no different from a beggar. Andoan, we need to be patient. Patience. Our enemies are increasing their troops crazily, and our people are starving in Southshore. To hell with patience. At this moment, the only remaining Morning Star court mage who had been guarding Lang suddenly opened his old and muddy eyes. "Your Majesty, the latest news is that Duke Marcus and Duke Berev's negotiations have been successful. He has already reached an agreement with the Berev family, and purchased 5,000 tons of wheat at a premium of 30% over the market price." Chapter 207. A 30% premium? That bastard from the Berev family. I'm going to kill him. Lothar's anger was almost bursting through the sky. Calm down. Andoan. Calm down. The people in Southshore are the citizens of Stormwind, not Alterac's citizens. No kingdom, including Rotterdam, can provide for hundreds of thousands of refugees without compensation. After Lang poured cold water on Lothar's head, Lothar finally calmed down. "How's Southshore now?" Noxus did not ask the Morning Star wizard this time, but another attendant. At this moment, a letter from a Griffin Knight arrived. Lang and Andoan opened the letter, and found that it was from Duke Bolvar Fordragon, who was in charge of guarding Southshore. "Your Majesty, I know you have been concerned about the situation of the citizens in Southshore. I'm here to report the latest news. In fact, the situation of the refugees is improving rapidly. More than half of the refugees have moved into wooden houses. Mr. Edwin Van Cleef, who is in charge of building the houses, seems to have adopted a method of building houses called molding from Duke Marcus. Although the houses look the same, it can prevent our people from being exposed to the sun and rain in a short period of time. The new temporary palace has been built. It's on top of a hill at the edge of Southshore, and you can overlook the sea. His Highness William is very fond of the new 2-story stone palace. The merfolk under Sir Marcus have started to chase a large number of fish to the coast. I saw with my own eyes that as long as they cast a net on the shore, they will definitely be able to catch fish. I have to say, this is a miracle. It would be even better if we could get food from the Berev family. That's because the food collected from the western wilderness and Rotterdam can only last for 2 weeks at most. Although I don't want to admit it, I have no place to interfere in the civil affairs. Sir Marcus's arrangements are perfect, and my interference will only make things worse. The only problem now is that the people are pessimistic about the future of the country. Sir Benedict has tried his best to appease the people, but unfortunately, the effect is not great. The worst thing is that we lack food, necessary equipment, and a clear military goal. The morale of the army is at its lowest. After reading Ballwald's letter, Lang heaved a long sigh of relief. Bolvar and Benedict did their best, and I can't blame them for anything. Lang put down the letter. Indeed, Benedict is a good man, but not a capable one, Noxus said. In fact, Archbishop Benedict of Stormwind City was also a good friend of his. They had known each other for more than 20 years. On the contrary, our little Duque can always surprise us. I almost forgot that he's actually a mage and not my assistant minister. Lang showed a rare smile. I think we should give little Duque more power and more responsibility. Don't be fooled by his appearance. He is indeed a genius, but he is actually only 15 years old. Lothar showed Lang the white hair on his temples. That was proof that she had been harmed by Sargeraz's last curse. I know, but we don't have anyone we can use, do we? Even if it's you, I think you should find an assistant. All right, I will think about it. Lang thought for a moment, and wrote a letter asking Bolvar to give more autonomy to Duque. 5 days later, South Shore. Duque rushed back, travel-worn. He made a trip to Alterac on his way back, which could be considered a visit to the king. But as Duque expected, he did not see King Eden Pirinold. First, the king was unhappy that Duque had taken a detour to the Berev family instead of coming to Alterac, which was closer. Secondly, Eden had received a secret report from Turinas, the king of Lordaeron. It seemed that the king of the strongest of the 6 kingdoms had the intention to convene a major meeting involving all the human kingdoms, dwarves, and elves for the one that had just been removed. King Eden was distraught, and naturally had no time to entertain Duque, who was obviously promoted to the front lines as an emissary. An edict allowing Stormwind to build a refugee camp in South Shore, and a meal of food from the Alterac royal family. It was like sending off a beggar to Duque. Makarov was naturally indignant, but Duque just laughed it off. Since he knew the direction of history, he knew very well what kind of person the king of Alterac was. Duque did not care about anything else. He got the edict, ignored the food carts, and went straight back to South Shore. From the north to the south, he came out of the Altrank Mountains, entered the Hillsbrad Hills, passed Terran Mill, and was about to reach South Shore. Makarov was stupefied by the rows of neatly arranged wooden houses that looked like a lattice on the side of the road. Those who did not know the situation would think that a huge new city had been built here, and not a refugee camp that could accommodate nearly 500,000 people. When they saw Duke's family flag that was filled with death and terror, the children playing around the house, the women knitting or cooking, and the men building the house, everyone in the campsite and the surrounding forest raised their heads. Ah! It's Sir Marcus's flag. Is it that Sir Marcus? Quick! Bow your heads and salute. He is our great benefactor, Duke Marcus. The children and men saluted, and the peasant women saluted in an unfamiliar ladylike manner. There was no organization, no coercion, and they all saluted Duque spontaneously. Not only the people, but also the city guards, sheriffs, and passing legions, all knelt on one knee and placed their left hands on their chest, showing their heartfelt respect to the owner of the flag. To the people, counterattacking Stormwind City was something that was too far away. Perhaps the people were ignorant, and they did not know too many twists and turns. Their focus was only on the simplest and most simple things such as clothing, food, housing, and transportation. Saving them from the brutal beast men could naturally gain their gratitude for a while. But for the people to truly recognize him, it would take long-term efforts to at least meet their basic needs. Duque did it. He not only used his fleet to save hundreds of thousands of Stormwind citizens, but he also built South Shore into a holy place where there was no hunger or cold, and there was not too much suffering. On the way here, not a single refugee had died on the way, and not a single citizen had shown a look of despair. Duke used his miraculous methods to stop the collapse of the building. In the eyes of the people, compared to King Rin, who lost his country, and Lothar, who was constantly defeated, Duque was the real hero. "Salute our hero, Sir Duke Marcus!" an unknown officer shouted. A second later, it was a tsunami of 100,000 soldiers and civilians shouting in unison. "Long live Sir Duke Marcus!" Chapter 208. His voice even startled the queen and the prince, who were gazing into the distance outside the new palace. "Mother, is that Duke Marcus's horse team? Why do I feel that Duke Marcus is more popular than father?" William asked his mother, slightly confused. This question made Bolvar, who was at the side, break out in cold sweat. The queen smiled apologetically at Bolvar, and then educated the little prince. "William, you must remember. Only those who give their people a good life are true heroes. Since ancient times, why are so many heroes who have defeated evil beings praised and remembered by people? The key is that they fight for the people." Fight for the people? Yes. They protect their people and let them live a happy life, so they are heroes. Not only did Duke Marcus defeat the demon king Sargeras, but he also defeated the attacks of the orcs many times. He used his fleet to save hundreds of thousands of people, and let them all live a life of food and clothing. So Duke Marcus is now a hero in the hearts of the people. The queen patiently guided the little prince. "Why do I hear the servants talking bad about father? They say that he is a king who lost his country or something, and not a hero." The queen didn't mind. Instead, she continued to guide William. "That's because the people blame your father for the fall of Stormwind City. Don't take it to heart, William. One day, your father will take back Stormwind City, and become the great hero in your heart again. Also, as a king, you should never be jealous of the achievements of your subordinates. Just like how your uncle Anduin is more famous than your father, there is no point in comparing. The glory of a hero can never overshadow the glory of a king. Do you understand?" "Yes." At this time, Duque's horse team had already arrived outside the new Stormwind Palace. The queen brought the prince to meet Duque. Duque didn't expect the queen to say, "Thank you, Duque. You are so outstanding. It's a pity that William doesn't have an elder sister. Otherwise, I would definitely let you marry into the royal family." This sentence almost choked Duque to death. Although the royal family would occasionally use marriages to win over their important ministers, Duque never thought that this would happen to him. Fortunately, Varian had no sisters. I'm actually still young. Don't look at me like this, I'm only 15 years old." Duque stammered. Duque also felt that it was a blessing in disguise. Originally, Sargeras' curse had turned the young Khadgar into a small old man in history. However, with the help of the soul of Mediva's father and Lothar, and the fact that Mediva's counterattack came faster, he only aged a few years. Not only did he look more mature, but he also found that he had grown a lot taller after staying in Karazhan for a while. Now, he was about 1.8 meters tall, which made him look like a young man in his 20s. This made it much easier for him to deal with foreign bigwigs. An underage youth was not qualified to sit at the negotiating table. 18 is a watershed. Even if Duque wasn't actually 18 years old, the fact that he looked like he was would make the other party feel much better. However, the queen's mention of marriage really scared Duque. Was this equivalent to feeding dog food to a single dog who had been single for 20 years in his previous life? Indeed. Strictly speaking, Varian should call you brother. Come, Varian, call me Brother Duque. Hello, brother. William called out obediently. In an instant, Duque's heart received 100,000 points of happiness. Damn, Varian, who was revered by the players in his previous life and was almost the representative of a generation of great men, had actually called him brother. Although William was just a Shota now, King Wa was still King Wa. Duque was touched to death. Seeing Duque's strange emotion, the Queen and Duke Bolvar looked at each other and smiled. Duque, you've just become a noble, so it's no wonder. Most nobles will have their parents or relatives arrange marriage partners before they reach adulthood. It's a pity that the large families in Stormwind suffered heavy losses. Otherwise, I would have found a way to find you a beautiful noble lady to be your wife. Speaking of the word, beautiful, for some reason, Duque thought of Aurelia, that meaty demon king. Alright, at this moment, Duque was evil. Logically speaking, as a duke, shouldn't he have some maids and a harem that he could have as he pleased? Why am I still busy like a dog all day, running around everywhere? Sigh, thinking too much makes me cry. I'm really not in a hurry. There are too many things to do now. His Majesty has just given me instructions to complete an important mission. I have to complete this mission first. Duque spouted some nonsense and ran away. Damn, an arranged marriage. Why does it fall on my head, he thought. What if I'm given a crooked date? What if Aurelia wants to marry me? Duque thought as he ran away. The Queen was amused. It's only at times like this that people realize that Duque is still a youth. Bolvar nodded with a smile. Yes, once things settle down, Duque's marriage will have to be on our agenda. It's the king's job to work hard for the revival of Stormwind at the negotiation table. It is my duty as the Queen to gain more support for His Majesty through marriage. William is still too young, and Duque's age is just right. Bolvar had obviously done his homework. I've thought about this as well. Although it's a little unfair to Duque, I did gather some information. Oh. Tell me about it. The Queen's eyes twinkled, a mischievous smile on her face. Bolvar gave the first candidate, Duke Barev's daughter, Alicia Barev, is more suitable in terms of age and status. The Queen nodded lightly and said, marriage with the Barev family can indeed solve our current problem, but it's not ideal. Firstly, it might provoke the Alterac royal family. Secondly, I feel that Duque's achievements are not limited to this. A duke's daughter is not suitable for him. Bolvar immediately gave the second candidate. In fact, since Duke Marcus is a wizard with boundless prospects, and most of his assets are at sea, there is a very suitable candidate. Who? Princess Kurtiras, Her Highness Jaina Proudmoore, only 12 years old, is currently studying magic in the Dalajan. Her. That's indeed a very suitable candidate. If we want to counterattack Stormwind City in the future, we can't do without Kurtiras' help. However, she seems to be close to Prince Arthas of Lordaeron and Prince Kuel Salis Kale, that's Sunstrider. The Queen frowned. I see. That depends on the situation. Do you have any other recommendations? Bolvar shrugged. If we don't consider the Duke, then it can only be His Majesty Menethil's beloved daughter, Her Highness Kalia. Her age is very suitable, 15 years old. Chapter 209. Duque did not know that he had been sold by the Queen and Bolvar, who appeared to be loyal but was actually a scoundrel. If he succeeded, then he would have been sold and still counted the money for them. After returning to Southshore, Duque was really busy. He only had a few words with the mayor of Southshore, the future legendary Henny Marab, and he was immediately overwhelmed by a lot of things. In the temporary official residence, which was a wooden house with a living room, a dining room, and 2 bedrooms, Duque had to face a mountain of official documents and messy requests. Obviously, Bolvar had not played the game, SimCity, and did not understand city planning. His fief had been passed down from his ancestors since ancient times. Bolvar was a purer warrior, and he was not good at internal affairs. Therefore, the internal affairs eventually fell to Duque. Because he knew that Duque had strict requirements for city planning, he still had to get Duque's consent to the general direction. With a wave of his hand, Duque first took the special permission from Barev to suppress Mayor Marab. Your lord, Duke Barev, allows us to set up refugee camps and related facilities anywhere in the Hillsbrad Hills. Then, Duque found the civil officials of Stormwind City, and with a wave of a pen, drew a circle on both sides of the road from South Shore to the Hillsbrad farm, which was more than 100 kilometers long. Well, it was all reclaimed as farmland, and he directly made it his home. Then, Duque asked Windsor to gather people to clean up the Yetis in the mine north of the road. This huge humanoid creature with a height of more than 3 meters was a great threat to the refugees in Stormwind. Well, there was also a mine called the Jasper Mine nearby, which was kindly accepted by Duque. Finally, Duque waited for 2 unexpected people, his followers Edwin Van Cleef and Brian Stallman. Your Excellency Duke Marcus, Brian Stallman, the sheriff of the Western Wilderness, pays his respects. Looking at the middle-aged man with gray hair in front of him, Duke unknowingly froze. Duque had been keeping an eye on Brian Stallman. It was very simple, because according to history, this guy would become a marshal. He was one of the few grassroots heroes who managed to climb to the top in the disastrous Stormwind. Unlike Windsor, who died in the game's history, Garion was a late bloomer. Until Duque traveled to this world, Garion was still doing well as a marshal. Brian was born in the Wild West. In that history, he followed Lothar to South Shore when Stormwind City fell, and then joined the Knights of the First Holy Knight Uther. At that time, he was mainly active in the holy city of Stratholme. After that, Lordaeron was in chaos, and news of the Defias Brotherhood's rebellion came from the West Wilderness. He returned to the Western Wilderness alone to help his fellow villagers. Because Stormwind City didn't send any reinforcements to the Westmoreland, Old Man Garion was furious. So, he put on his battle robe again and called upon the people of the Westmoreland to form the Westmoreland People's Army to fight against the Defias Brotherhood. After the fall of the Brotherhood, Varian returned. Then came the Northern Expedition. Stallman's People's Army also participated in the Northern Expedition and received a regular army, renamed the Moon Creek Brigade. Garion himself also returned to the military system, and his title rose. After the Northern Expedition, the old man returned to his hometown with the Westmoreland People's Army. But not long after, the Great Cataclysm happened again, and the remnants of the Brotherhood rose again. Just like that, Grian Stallman managed to climb to the position of Marshal after repeated struggles. Anyway, Duque knew that Garion was a super powerful person. Now, the Marshal of the future generation said the second sentence. Duke, I've talked to your follower, Mr. Van Cleef. I think we can open up a battlefield in the Westmoreland, break the Orcs' control over the Westmoreland. In the future, we can prepare for His Majesty Rin's counterattack against Stormwind City. Pfft. Duque spat out water. He really spat it out. He spat out the water he just drank in front of Van Cleef and Stallman. Even though he turned his head, he still spat it out. What the hell was this? This pair of gay friends who loved and killed each other in history actually told him that they wanted to join forces to open up a battlefield behind enemy lines in the Western Wilderness? Hey! Van Cleef! Did you know that Stallman was the one who issued the mission to behead you in history? Duque could not stop cursing in his heart, but after thinking about it, he immediately understood Stallman's reason. Duque pretended to take out a handkerchief and wiped the corner of his mouth. My apologies, I'm being rude. I didn't mean to mock you, I just happened to think of something. Van Cleef and Stallman both lowered their heads and counted the non-existent ants on the floor, pretending that they did not see the scene of Duque spitting out water. Duque was now a big shot who had to deal with thousands of affairs every day. The fact that he took the time to meet them was completely due to Van Cleef. Stallman, who was now just a small local sheriff, of course did not dare to say anything. He could only keep his doubts to himself. Duke crossed his fingers and placed them under the tip of his nose, covering half of his face. He had a serious expression on his face. Please note that His Majesty Rin has issued an edict before he went to Lordaeron to seek reinforcements. In order to deal with the possible further invasion of the Orcs, all Stormwind troops are now being reorganized, and they are forbidden from leaving the Hillsbrad Hills. Alright, I want to hear your reasons. The real reasons. The two fellows looked at each other, and Brian Stallman spoke first. Honorable Duke, I was born and raised in the Westmoreland. I know everything about the Westmoreland. His Majesty has indeed issued an imperial order for the people of the Westmoreland to seek refuge. You have also sent ships to pick up the people of the Westmoreland. But in reality, there are at least 10,000 people who are unwilling to leave their land. They are hiding in various mines, temporarily living on stored food. They need the kingdom's support. The kingdom's future counterattack against Stormwind City will also require their support. Just like when Stormwind City was besieged, it was the food from the Westmoreland that supported Stormwind City. After Grian finished, Duque looked at Van Cleve. What about you? Master. Van Cleve seemed to find it difficult to speak, but he still said it. When I left Stormwind City, I always wanted to do more for you, Master. Not long after I arrived here, I passed the profession test for thief. The instructor said that I am a genius thief that appears once in 50 years. So I thought that if I lead a team of thieves, it might be more helpful to you, Master. Duque sighed in his heart. Talent was indeed talent. Van Cleve was made to be a thief. But history had completely changed. The Defias Brotherhood that everyone hated in history was destined to never appear again. So it was not surprising that Stallman would follow Van Cleve and seek refuge with him. Everyone knew that he, Duque, could recruit 10,000 private soldiers. As long as he agreed, he could completely bypass the king's ban. Duque thought for a moment. All right. Chapter 210. Duque agreed. Even though he still needed bandits in the future, they would need to be powerful ones. Van Cleve was definitely not up to the task. There were many things he needed to make in the following days, but there was nothing that required Van Cleve's skills. Those who truly needed Van Cleve's skills would have to wait until Stormwind City was rebuilt. Duque had always believed that talent should not be wasted. The two were overjoyed to see Duque agree. They looked at Duque expectantly, waiting to see how much support Duque would give them. Duque cleared his throat. I cannot go against His Majesty's orders. So, Garion, you must give up your position as sheriff and become the commander of my private army. No problem. Garion was willing to do anything for the people of the Westfall Wilderness. Edwin, you're still new in this field, so you'll be Garion's assistant. Understand? Understood, Master. Edwin nodded. Duque pressed his hands on the table and put on a serious expression. As a form of support for your work behind the enemy lines, I'll allow you to recruit 3,000 experienced volunteers in Southshore in my name. I'll pay each of them 2 gold coins in advance. Remember, you are not allowed to recruit soldiers from the Stormwind Army. If Duque had done this before the Dark Portal incident, he would have been asking for trouble. But now, it was completely different. Among the 50,000 elite soldiers who had withdrawn from Stormwind City, less than half of them were active soldiers. The rest were the private soldiers of various nobles, militia, and even warriors who were born as ordinary citizens. They had experienced the orcs in the past, so they were definitely experts. Both of them heaved a sigh of relief at Duque's words. This was a great support. I can also transfer 3 Bloodsail warships to you as your personal supply ships. But remember, I don't want you to launch too many attacks against the orcs in the first 3 months. You'll be courting death before the orcs' main force invades the northern continent. Also, Duque opened the map and pointed at Moon Creek Town in the western wilderness. I know there's a Moon Creek mine here. And I knew that in the deepest part of the mine, there was a huge hole in the sea that could be used as a secret dock. Therefore, I hope that you will use Moon Creek Town as your base and turn the Moon Creek mine into the Beastman's Death Mine. I said it, I really said it. Ha 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 ha. Looking at Van Cleef and Stallman's worshipful gazes, Duke's heart was filled with joy. Ha ha ha. I can't believe I taught the boss of the death mines in the history to go to the death mines and trap the orcs. I'm such a genius. Ha 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 ha. Duque laughed in his heart. He laughed proudly and wantonly. Van Cleef, on the other hand, had a look of realization on his face. So when we first mentioned going to the Western Wilderness, you reacted so strongly because you actually had the same idea, but we both had the same idea? That's right. Duque acted as if he and Van Cleef had a tacit understanding. What else could Duque say in the face of Van Cleef's perfect imagination? Of course, he could only say, yes. You're absolutely right. Van Cleef was indeed very happy. After Duque let them leave, Van Cleef returned as soon as he left. Master. What is it? Duque poked his head out from the mountain of documents and requests. Van Cleef was a little bashful. It's like this. Master, you don't seem to have any servants or maids. This doesn't match your status at all, Duque replied calmly. If you say it matches your status, then please take a look at the Queen's and Prince William's palaces. Van Cleef immediately understood what Duque meant. Master, it's actually about my daughter, Vanessa. I'm going to the Western Wilderness now, and I'm afraid it's not safe for me to bring her along. So I was wondering if I could let her be a maid here. When Van Cleef mentioned Vanessa, Duque was stunned. He couldn't help but think of Vanessa Van Cleef in the history. A young girl who had witnessed her father's tragic death with her own eyes. She tried her best to escape capture and survive. When she grew up, she devoted herself to restoring and rebuilding everything that her father had fought for. This sounded like a hero's coming-of-age story, didn't it? Most people would think so, but in this tragic story, the villains were the nobles of Stormwind, including the widely acknowledged wise and great King William. The cause was also the conspiracy of the Princess of the Black Dragons, Onyxia. She tricked Van Cleef, and then in turn tricked Stormwind. Van Cleef's Mason Guild rebuilt Stormwind, and instigated the nobles of Stormwind not to pay the Mason Brotherhood a single coin's wages. This directly led to the Brotherhood's riots and demonstrations, and during the demonstrations, a stone thrown by a Mason killed Queen Tiffany of William's queen. This was a tragedy of an official forcing the people to rebel, and a tragedy created by evil forces. Vanessa Van Cleef's most famous words were, "Hope. Is that how I should feel when I watch you lackeys of the nobles chop off my father's head? To me, hope is just a vicious joke in this cruel world. There is no hope. There is only Vanessa." Thinking of the tragic father-daughter duo, Van Cleef, Duque couldn't help but feel a little warmth in his heart. Let her come. As long as I'm not dead, I won't let her come to harm. Edwin came with his daughter, Vanessa. Little one. Although Duque really wanted to use this adjective to describe Vanessa, it was obvious that it wouldn't work. According to Edwin, Vanessa was only 13 years old, but she was so well-bred. Duque's dog eyes were about to go blind. Vanessa was about 170 meters tall, and had a head of black hair that reached her ears. She wasn't as beautiful as Aurelia, but she still had 80 points. The sturdy dumpling was at least a C cup. Beneath the linen shorts was a pair of long white legs. Note that she was only 13 years old, and still had room to grow. According to the trend of history, she definitely wouldn't be disabled. Duque coughed. From now on, I'm your master. Yes, Master Marcus. The little girl called out reluctantly, her eyes red, as if Duque had forced his father to sell her here. Duque was embarrassed. Just help clean the room, and then learn more combat skills. I don't need a pure maid. Okay, you can go now. Yes. The little girl left, and before she left, she gave her father an extremely aggrieved look. All right, Edwin, come back once every 3 months to report on your work. Also, remember that your master is from MI7, don't get too close to him. Chapter 211. Duque still had a lot of things to do. The scouts sent back news. The Horde Chief's flag had been replaced with a black hammer, and the dark portal had been opened again. This meant that Orgrim was still the Horde Chief, just like in history. Duque felt that it was a pity. He had already hated Orgrim to this extent, but Orgrim still managed to become the Horde chief. He didn't know if he should sigh at how strong the inertia of history was, or that a true hero would always be the most dazzling existence no matter what. Duque was worried about his own butterfly effect. The Horde's attack on Stormwind City had expended an unexpected amount of manpower. Without the help of Medivh, which was controlled by Sargeras, the transportation capacity of the Dark Portal was greatly reduced. It would be good if it could only carry a third of what it used to. The Horde could still continuously transport Orc warriors from Draenor. But Duque knew that the warriors that came later were not as strong as the hundreds of thousands of elites that came first. The first batch were either veterans who had gone through the war with the Draenei, or warriors who had proven their strength in cruel hunts. If the Orc elites before the Dark Portal were 10, then the later batch would only be around 7. And Duque's target was the Blackrock tribe, which made it easier for Orgrim to command the Horde. One could imagine that Ghoul Dan, a despicable and powerful warlock, would provide more powerful warriors for Orgrim in order to save his own life. The Horde acted as they did in history, but the negotiations between the human countries had reached a stalemate. Duque knew that only when the 7 human kingdoms united, along with the dwarves, pygmies, and high elves, would they be able to form the first alliance in the world of Azeroth. The problem was that the alliance that should have been established had not made any progress. According to Lothar's message, Duque knew what had happened. Now, the kings and high nobles of many countries, including King Tyreenas of Lordaeron, all thought that Lang was just a useless person who couldn't even defend his own country, after being chased away by a troll-like monster. At the end of the day, the root of the problem was Duke, the butterfly. In history, Lang had died, and Lothar had come to the Rotterdam kingdom with a pitiful number of guards and the little prince. Lothar plays the role of a tragic hero. Why were the other 6 human kingdoms willing to elect Lothar as the commander of the alliance? Firstly, it was because of the threat of the tribe. Secondly, it was because of Lothar's noble bloodline. In history, Lothar had acknowledged the human kings as kings in the name of the last son of Sorodin the Great in exchange for a political union. Thirdly, Stormwind in history had no military strength at all. It was just an empty shell. The countries were most at ease handing their soldiers over to Lothar. At this moment, only Stormwind and the Dwarven Kingdom in the south of the Eastern Kingdom were under attack. The northern continent was still as peaceful as ever, as if nothing had happened. Lothar did not play the card of Thoradin the Great, either. The most important thing was that Lang had 50,000 elites under his command. Who would listen to whom after they united became a major problem. After all, the split of the Arather Empire was ultimately due to different ideologies, and no one was willing to submit to the other. Duque was a little anxious. As a transmigrator, he definitely knew which 2 cards the tribe would play next. The first card was the trolls. They were tall and terrifying humanoid creatures that were thinner than orcs and had 2 long fangs. They were native to planet Azeroth. As early as 14,000 years ago, the trolls were the rulers of this planet. The trolls had established many large countries, among which the Amani Empire and the Gurubashi Empire had the largest territories. Both empires were ruled by the Zendala tribe, so they were also praised as the Zendala Empire. Even the famous Night Elves were a group of humanoid creatures from the Dark Troll tribe that migrated to the Well of Eternity. They gradually evolved under the influence of the Well's arcane energy. More than 1,000 years ago, it was precisely because of the rise of the human race that the great demons, who had already been split into countless clans, were chased away from the most fertile lands and chased into the barren lands deep in the mountains. The hatred of the trolls towards the humans and the high elves was definitely off the charts. When the orc tribe arrived, they would definitely hit it off. The second card was the forbidden evil existence, the Death Knight. Duque shuddered at the thought of how powerful and terrifying the Death Knight was. After thinking about it, Duque decided to personally promote the establishment of the Alliance. The 25th of September was no different from any other day after King Tyreenas of Lordaeron gathered the representatives of the various countries. Endless wrangling, endless sarcasm and ridicule. Among the 9 big shots, other than Lang and Tyrrhena's who were kings, the other 5 human kingdoms sent dukes. The dwarves sent a brigadier general, and the high elves only sent a substitute counselor. It was these guys who were not even as high as Lang who dared to spit at Lang. Humph. What orc rampage? They're just a bunch of troll-like beasts. I didn't expect that the son of Thoradin the Great, who chased away the trolls and made the humans rise, couldn't even defeat a bunch of troll-like guys, and had to run around the sea to escape. It was a duke of the Gilnea's kingdom who spoke. You. If it wasn't for the fact that killing this guy would cause a serious international dispute, Lothar almost wanted to smash his white glove on the guy's face. In the end, isn't it all because of your guardian, Medivh? If it wasn't for Medivh's betrayal, would there have been an orc invasion after the dark portal was opened? Would there have been so many problems? Why do the entire human world have to clean up the mess you caused? The representative of the Alterac kingdom followed suit. Enough. Don't you dare insult Medivh. It's obviously the demon king Sargera's plot. If you continue to insult him, I don't mind challenging you to a duel as Medivh's best friend. This time, even King Lang couldn't take it anymore. As a childhood friend of Lang, Medivh's character was definitely noble. After knowing the truth, Lang also tried his best to protect the reputation of his childhood friend. Even after Medivh's death, Lang continued to work hard for this. Now that this guy had publicly slapped Medivh's face, wasn't this also slapping Lang's face? Since Lang was so tough, that guy finally kept quiet. But there was still no progress in the meeting. At this time, a young mage who had just appeared beside Lang that day, and was ignored by the representatives of the various kingdoms, had a mysterious smile on his face. Chapter 212. 1,000 years of peace had brought about many things. For example, prosperity and numbness. The bustling life in the city made everyone like flowers in a greenhouse that could not withstand any wind and rain. Once a gust of wind called orcs broke the glass window of the greenhouse, they would wither or even wither. In the history, even if Lothar made a shocking concession and sacrificed the glory of his ancestors, he personally admitted that the era of great Emperor Thoradin was over, and he acknowledged the royal authority of the kings. It still took more than 3 months to complete the integration of the alliance. It was only after the orcs bypassed the Stormguard kingdom's Sodder Bridge defense line and invaded the hinterland of the various kingdoms in the northern continent from the sea that the kingdoms came to their senses. Note that the kingdoms here did not include the Rotterdam kingdom. The Rotterdam kingdom, which had the strongest economic and military strength, was almost the last to be attacked because of its geographical location in the north. For a long time, the Rotterdam kingdom was in a state of local war. They would just spend some money and troops, and then it would not affect them. The nobles sang and danced, and watched the beasts fight. When the battle at the front line was at its most intense, the bastard nobles even went to the Tyrrhena's kingdom every day to complain that Lothar was a vampire, which consumed too much of their taxes and manpower. What Duque wanted to do was to awaken the lion. Even if it was old, it was still a lion. Lang and Andoin glanced at Duque. They did not know what Duque was up to, but Duque must have done something. It was because Duque had said that he would use a new method to stimulate a certain king's nerves. What the hell was this new method? Lang and Andoin felt that something was amiss as soon as they heard it. However, they still acquiesced to Duque after the negotiations were not going anywhere. The representatives of the various kingdoms did not stop criticizing the Stormwind. The representative of the Gilnea's kingdom pointed at the head of the frozen chief, Blackhand, and mocked King Lang. You said this is the head of the chief of those green-skinned monsters. Maybe this guy is a little big, but who can prove that this is their leader? Didn't you say that they were all intelligent monsters? Why would their leader come to you and let you chop off his head? Stop joking, no king would easily stand at the front lines. Why would the beast men, who clearly have the upper hand, send a great chieftain for you to kill? You. Noxus was enraged. He had risked his life to kill Blackhand. Now, it was actually reduced to worthless. Duke, however, stopped Lothar and turned to the representative of Gilnis with a smile. How about this? The army of our Stormwind Kingdom will go to the battlefield at the same time as your army. You can take this big head and shake it in front of the tribe. Let's see who the green-skinned creatures will chase. You. Gilnis' representative suddenly stood up, wanting to ridicule Duque, but at this time, something happened. Just yesterday, before Duque and his entourage arrived at Lordaeron City, an unfamiliar slave trader presented a batch of special gifts to Menethil II and requested an audience with the king. Everyone knew that the king of Lordaeron would not simply meet with a slave trader who came out of nowhere. If it wasn't for the fact that the slave trader's gifts were good enough, even a person of status would not have appeared. In the end, it was a Viscount of Lordaeron who received the slave trader. The merchant repeatedly told the Viscount who met him that this batch of goods needed to be injected with a tranquilizer made from the peace bloom, as the main medicine every 12 hours. Otherwise, the existing restraints and cages would not be able to hold them. The slave trader even sent a formal notice in the form of a document through formal diplomatic channels. This slave trader was obviously someone's subordinate. However, as someone expected, the slave trader's reasonable request was ignored, and all of the slave trader's warnings were ignored. This was the arrogance of Lordaeron, the most powerful of the 7 kingdoms. Arrogance was also a common problem among the nobles of Lordaeron. More than 1,000 years ago, it was the ancestors of these arrogant nobles who transferred their property to the more prosperous Lordaeron region, leaving the descendants of Thoradin the Great to die in the ruined Rapid Stream Castle. No one would have thought that more than 1,000 years later, they would also pay a terrible price for their arrogance. After this point in time, the Lordaeron kingdom would perish because of the arrogance and stubbornness of King Turinas. Duque had no intention of stopping this, but the Lordaeron kingdom was still extremely powerful at this point in time, and Duque did not mind using the arrogance of the people of Lordaeron to make them suffer a little. Dang dang dang, the alarm that symbolized the invasion of foreign enemies had not sounded for 1,000 years in this pure white city that was also regarded as a holy city by countless people. When the loud and shrill alarm rang, no one in the entire Lordaeron kingdom reacted. Almost everyone was stunned for more than 3 seconds. Only the most dutiful guards realized after a few seconds that it was King alarm. All of a sudden, the entire Lordaeron was in an uproar. The representative of Gilnis, who was about to scold them, was stunned. As the leader of this place, Menethil II, who thought that he was the noblest among the 7 kings, could not help but be furious. His white beard flared up, and he stared at his servant with his old eyes. Quickly go and find out what happened. Why did you sound the alarm? The trouble was at the arena. In this era of lack of entertainment, bloody and exciting gladiatorial competitions were the most attractive entertainment, second to none. There were countless gladiatorial arenas of all sizes in the entire northern continent. Just like Thrall, who was the son of the chief of the Frostwolf clan, Durotan, Thrall was picked up by a human after Durotan was assassinated by the assassins of the Shadow Council. After that, Thrall was raised as a slave gladiator for a long time. On the surface, the entire Lordaeron kingdom did not care about the invasion of the orcs. In fact, the slave gladiators of the orcs were definitely in high demand and were the most popular goods in the Lordaeron kingdom. A healthy orc slave warrior could be sold for more than 10,000 gold coins recently. Be it the nobles of the Lordaeron kingdom or the black-hearted owners of the gladiatorial arenas, none of them could resist this temptation. There were 100 orcs, and they were all elites of the Blackstone clan. There were even a few personal guards of Blackhand. In order to collect these orcs, someone had put in a lot of effort. After the effects of the mind-calming potion on the orcs wore off, they heard a voice. It was in the orc language. This voice told them that the head of their chief was in the highest castle, and it was being wantonly humiliated and displayed by the humans. Revenge. 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 Driven by their frenzied thoughts, the orcs easily broke free from the iron shackles that were as thick as a human baby's arm, broke the iron bars of the cage, and charged out. Chapter 213. Impossible. The managers of the Colosseum, who dealt with ferocious monsters all day long, and the guards responsible for watching over the slaves, were all stunned. The humanoid monster in front of him was beyond the scope of human imagination. Despite the mysterious merchant's repeated warnings, the guards saw the burly bodies of these orcs and still imprisoned them according to the standards of the trolls. In their opinion, even two giant demons wouldn't be able to break free. They were wrong. Beastmen were already stronger than trolls, let alone berserk beastmen who had drunk demon blood. Following a roar that shook the entire arena, 100 berserk beastmen broke free of their cages and charged towards the light. Each and every one of these men, who would definitely be strong and powerful compared to humans, were like children in front of them. The long whips used to punish the slaves would only make them more ferocious. The gigantic fists smashed into the faces of the scarred and ferocious-looking guards, and the abundant power easily smashed everything it came into contact with. His cheekbones instantly collapsed, followed by his temples and lower jaw, and then his entire skull collapsed. Before the human cervical vertebrae could support or cushion the impact, the violent force had already shattered the entire skull. Yellow, white, red, all sorts of colors dyed the walls of the Colosseum, which must have been dyed black with the blood of countless slaves, into the colors of the abusers. More guards heard the news and rushed over. They brought the best equipment they could. However, it was useless. These berserk orcs could set off a bloody storm with just a punch or a swing of their arms. By the time the orcs came back to their senses, there was no one alive in the basement except for the orcs. The inexplicable voice seemed to be guiding them, and they seemed to feel the unyielding anger of the great chief, Black Hand, roaring. Loch-Narash, the leader of the Black Hand guards, shouted, ordering the orcs to arm themselves. They quickly gathered all the heavy weapons they could find, smashed open the door of the arena, and saw light, Loktarogar. He would rather die than win. In this unknown country filled with humans, in this place where enemies were everywhere, the glory of the tribe and the violent demon blood in their bodies drove them to charge towards the tallest and most magnificent building. The city guards were alerted. They rushed over upon hearing the news and saw a group of peerless monsters with green skin. Don't be afraid. These were orcs. Get into formation and surround him. Before the squad leader could finish shouting, a huge iron pillar that was thicker than a man's thigh had already swept towards them. The leader of the black-handed bodyguards used his unparalleled strength to teach these human warriors who had never fought against the orcs a good lesson. This lesson was called strength. The round shields that were neatly lined up in a row did not seem like shields at all. They were easily swept away by the heavy iron pillar in one breath. The sound of the iron shields exploding was mixed with the screams and wails of the city guards, deeply stimulating the nerves of every city guard behind them. Fear gripped their hearts easily. For a moment, even their hearts forgot to beat. Every dilated pupil reflected the horrifying figure that was 3 meters tall. It did not look like a living creature at all, but more like an ancient demon god. The first row of city guards whose arms were smashed into pieces let out a shrill scream. The second row of city guards was almost stunned. They paid with their lives for the momentary lapse in concentration on the battlefield. The muscles of the orc bodyguards swelled to the point that they were about to explode. With the strength of a giant, the long iron pillar that was swung out with all its might stopped abruptly within half a meter. Then, it turned around and swept again. Those who fell to the ground avoided the disaster. The second row of city guards who were stunned on the spot had their bodies sliced in half at the waist. The scene was so bloody that it easily destroyed their rationality. I don't want to die. These city guards who could only bully gangsters and thieves on normal days suddenly lost their will to fight. They collapsed and abandoned their swords and shields, trying to escape from this terrifying charaba in a fluster. Out of the gladiatorial arena was the first street of Rotterdam Kingdom known as Gladiator Street. This street that mainly sold swords and weapons had always been the favorite of the rich and powerful. Ordinary citizens were not qualified to enter this street. As a subsidiary industry of the gladiatorial arena, this street not only had a large number of high-quality weapons and armor that were far superior to the standard weapons, but also all kinds of rare equipment and accessories. A gladiator with a broken sword and a useless shield would not receive much cheers no matter how good his skills were. The rich and powerful who had gladiators would invest in their favorite gladiators with gorgeous armor and accessories. After all, this was where their pride was. Hence, the leader of the bodyguards found a huge skull of a six-horned rhinoceros. This huge skull had already become extremely hard after being soaked in molten iron. Together with the 6 huge horns that extended forward, it was a terrifying piece of equipment that could attack and defend. The only problem was that this thing was too heavy. Even the troll slaves could not use it. But now, it all belonged to the bodyguards. Holding it, the bodyguards easily caught up with a carriage with a gorgeous noble coat of arms. They crashed into it with their hard and sharp horns. Half a second later, the entire carriage was blasted into pieces, along with the people inside, turning into scarlet scraps. Blood and internal organs dyed the entire gladiator street red. When the orcs fought from one end of the long street to the end, they saw a huge square with a fountain, as well as a huge building with pure white walls. Lock, Tar Ogre! The bodyguards let out a deafening roar again. Without hesitation, the 100 orcs launched an attack on the Rotterdam kingdom, which had the most guards and was the most heavily guarded. Clang, clang, clang. When the Rotterdam kingdom could not close the drawbridge in time, and even the palace gate was breached, not only were the higher-ups of the Rotterdam kingdom alarmed, but also a priest who was preaching in the palace's sanctuary. There are actually enemies in the Rotterdam kingdom? Hearing the battle cries not far away, a burly male priest suddenly stood up. Teacher FAO, I'll go take a look. The archbishop sighed as he watched his disciple lift the heavy war hammer effortlessly. This disciple was good at everything. His devotion to the holy light and his faith in the holy light were also unparalleled. However, he felt that he was a little out of place with the profession of priest. Go! Chapter 2:14. The shrill alarm was hurried and ear-piercing. As the king of the Rotterdam kingdom, Menethil II could no longer sit still. He abruptly stood up, and the torch-shaped crown that was like a claw exuded a scorching majesty. King Rin, as well as all the guests, please calm down. As the king of the Rotterdam kingdom, I have the confidence and ability to protect your safety. Please wait here for a moment. After saying that, Menethil II waved his hand without caring about the reactions of the others, and a large number of royal guards immediately rushed into the large conference hall to guard the main paths. There were also mages who came in to set up defensive arrays. The commotion was so exaggerated that one could imagine how humiliated the Rotterdam kingdom would be after this incident. The representatives of the various countries were either agitated or grumbling in their hearts. Their reactions were also rather interesting. Of course, the funniest ones were Lang and Lothar. The two of them couldn't help but look at Duque, as if to say, I knew it had something to do with you, kid. Duque shrugged and waved his hand, as if he was innocent. Lang rolled his eyes and said, who are you trying to fool? You've set 100,000 orcs on fire. You're the one with the most cunning ideas. Lothar was even more direct, and his face turned sullen. Being forced to a corner by the two big shots, Duque had no choice but to secretly make a 7 gesture. Okay, it was Lang's turn to remain silent this time. Lothar rolled his eyes. 7 referred to the 7th MI7. As an intelligence agency that belonged directly to the king, Lang didn't think that Duque had the ability to reach out to the 7th MI7. Needless to say, this was obviously a move by the 7th MI7, and as the head of the internal affairs of South Shore, Duque should be more or less aware of it. He seemed to have played a role. Lang was half right. If Lang went back to ask, he would get the answer that it was a plan planned by the 7th MI7. In fact, it was triggered by Duque. Because of Van Cleef, Duque found the master who taught Van Cleef the skills of a bandit. Duque bluntly pointed out that guy's identity. As a military intelligence agency, they had planted a spy around an important minister of the kingdom and were caught. This was undoubtedly a major failure. That guy's face also collapsed in an instant. How important was Duque now? In the army, there was even a saying that even if Lothar were to die, Duque should not die. Because these hundreds of thousands of exiled soldiers and civilians were now completely supported by Duque. Duque could review more than 1,000 reports and requests in an afternoon, and then he could multitask and write 10 different reports with 10 magic hands at the same time without making any mistakes. In fact, the system elf helped to categorize and summarize the confidence. After summarizing and reporting, Duque thought about it and the system elf controlled the hand of magic to write the comments. It was no exaggeration to say that Duque alone was equivalent to a cabinet and 100 civil officials. Coupled with Duque's previous brilliant military exploits, if Duque went to the king to complain, not to mention a small intelligence officer like him, the entire MI7 would definitely suffer. Duque pretended to be sullen and scolded angrily, "If you have so much time to do this, you might as well think about how to help His Majesty promote the establishment of the Alliance of the Seven Kingdoms." Even throwing a few orcs to Lordaeron to provoke that old man Tyrrhena's would be better than doing this. Although this sounded like an angry remark, it was a different matter when it fell into the ears of the female assassin, Pasonia Shaw, the boss of MI7. Because the Horde used a large number of wargs, which also had a sensitive nose, MI7 almost lost all channels of intelligence. Lang's dissatisfaction with MI7 had been there since the beginning of the Orc War. Pasonia was eager to do something that was beneficial to the kingdom. Duque's seemingly unintentional words inspired her. As an intelligence agency, she had the right to deal with the captives, so she took away 100 orcs. Unfortunately, she didn't know the orc language, so in the end, she could only bite the bullet and come to Duque. Duque didn't say anything and directly translated for Pasonia. In fact, Pasonia had also vaguely guessed that Duque wanted to use her and MI7. Some things were like a layer of paper that could be broken with a poke. With enough tacit understanding, no one would be able to break it. Duque wanted to use MI7 to promote the establishment of the alliance. MI7 wanted to make contributions to prove themselves. The result of this matter would not harm the interests of Stormwind. As a result, the two sides tacitly joined forces. Obviously, the head of MI7 did a good job. Tyrrhena's was kicked out of the conference hall like his but was on fire. "Then what's the new method you've prepared?" Lothar asked reluctantly. Duque raised his hand and displayed a smaller holographic projection. It was a clip of the Battle of Stormwind. The new display method really stunned Lothar. "Sorry, I misunderstood you." Lothar was also a very straightforward person. Seeing that Duque didn't really participate in this matter, he quickly forgot about it. At this moment, in the square in front of the main hall of the palace, the orcs were still charging forward. The arrows were like a storm, but they couldn't take the lives of the berserk orcs. Just like in the beginning of the war in Stormwind, the guards of the Rotterdam Kingdom underestimated the toughness of the orc's skin and flesh. The sharp arrows were stuck less than 3 centimeters into the orc's skin. It seemed that the orcs had become porcupines, but the orcs still roared and charged forward like demons. The shield swordsmen with large shields were easily blasted away, and dozens of spears stabbed at the same time, but they were all swept away by a single stick. The orcs were simply monsters that couldn't be killed, which made the guards of the royal family tremble in fear. The only thing that kept these guards standing here was their glory and their determination to not retreat. However, the orcs had finally met their match. It was a priest who was emitting a white glow. To the guard's knowledge, such a guy who knew some kind of healing magic was similar to the shaman's healing magic. The guard didn't think that such a guy could stop him. He was wrong. He was ridiculously wrong. When he used the large 6-horned rhinoceros skull to slam into it, the scene that happened below made him stunned. A hammer. A large silver hammer that was swung at high speed was mixed with a ferocious power that was no weaker than that of a chieftain, and it smashed towards the horned rhinoceros skull. With a loud bang, the horned rhinoceros skull that had smashed the carriages and destroyed the human shield formations one after another was easily smashed into pieces of various sizes by the hammer like a piece of glass that scattered in all directions. Without hesitation, the guard waved his right arm and blasted out the huge iron pole that he had pulled out from the arena. However, the strength of the other party was completely beyond his expectations. Clang dash, there was a loud clanging sound that was loud enough to make the surrounding guards cover their ears in pain. The guards' eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. What did I see? The iron pole that was as thick as an arm was bent by the hammer. Chapter 2:15. What the hell is this? Is this still the strength of a human? The human in front of him was clearly wearing a clergy's robe, but he had a body full of strong muscles. Although in the eyes of Blackhand's bodyguard, humans were all weak creatures with thin arms and legs, this human was clearly stronger and more powerful than other humans. Without giving Blackhand's bodyguard any more time to think, the priest used his hammer to knock away Blackhand's huge iron pole. Clang! The huge iron pole that was more than 4 meters long turned into a stream of light and flew more than 10 meters away, stabbing into the wall of the snow-white palace that was more than 5 meters tall. Monster! I will punish you on behalf of the holy light. The young priest with a reddish-brown beard swung his hammer again. The huge two-handed war hammer was as light as a child's toy in his hands. The young man's golden beard fluttered in the wind caused by the hammer. So strong. This was the last thought that the guard had left in this world. Just like how the guard had killed the humans with violence, he was now being killed by the humans with the same violence. As the leader of the slave rebellion and the strongest among the orcs, the death of the guard dealt a huge blow to the morale of the orcs. To the young priest's surprise, none of the orcs retreated. Their eyes were red as they shouted, "Loch Tar Ogre," which the priest could not understand, and rushed forward. The priest had no choice. Behind him was the palace of Lordaeron. Not only was there the king of Lordaeron, but there were also the king of Storm and other dignitaries. He did not know why the orcs would choose to carry out such a reckless attack that could not even be considered an assassination, but he knew that he could not let a single orc go. He could not count on the guards of the royal family of Lordaeron. He resolutely swung his war hammer and rushed forward with a fighting spirit that was not inferior to that of the orcs. The orcs were brave. They were natural war machines. Not only did they have stronger bodies than humans, but they also had stronger strength and faster speed. They also had a crazy fighting spirit. If he lost his weapon, he would use his fists. If his wrist was broken, he would use his feet to kick. If his feet were broken, he would use his teeth to bite. That priest saw with his own eyes an orc whose hands and feet were nailed to the wall by a pikeman not far from him. Taking advantage of the fact that a soldier went to check, the orc used his mouth full of fangs to bite off the soldier's neck. What a frightening creature this was. The priest could not help but be moved. With the addition of another priest who was also wielding a large hammer, the battle became even more one-sided. Not long after, all 100 orcs were annihilated. However, the price he paid was the lives of at least 500 Wang clan guards. This was not even counting the number of victims in the Street of Gladiators and the arena. King Tarina's Menethil, who had heard the news, arrived at the scene with a large group of guards. The horrifying scene in front of him almost made him vomit. The large number of dismembered corpses of the guards stung the king of Rotterdam's eyes. The king of the strongest human kingdom trembled, unable to speak for a long time. His wrinkled face looked a little old, but he was not yet 60 years old, so he was not yet senile. After a short period of extreme anger, Menethil too calmed down. Call King Lang and the other country's representatives here. Although what happened today is a misfortune for Rotterdam, I do not wish for this misfortune to spread to all the human kingdoms. After giving the order, Tarina's noticed a priest who did not fit in with the royal guards. The priest was wearing a priest robe that only had the upper half of his body left, and the lower half of his robe was torn. He was also holding a large hammer. Not far from him, there was another priest dressed in a similar outfit. Looking at their blood-stained bodies, it was clear that most of the orcs' deaths were related to them. Greetings, two young clergies. Did you kill these orcs? Your Majesty, I only killed 55. Your Majesty, I killed 38. King Tyrrhenas was stunned by the answers of the two priests. After a few seconds, he asked, "May I know your names?" I am Uther. I am Tyrion Fordring. Two priests carrying huge hammers bowed to the King of Lordaeron in unison. The scene was as weird as it could get. I admire your courage. As the King of Rotterdam, I announce that you will be rewarded. However, before that, I have more important things to do. I must first form an alliance with the other human kingdoms to fight against these hateful green beasts. At this moment, Tyrrhenas, who had been waiting to see what would happen, made a decision. The next report made Tyrrhenas even more certain of his decision. A duke, an earl, and a countess who was known as one of the top 10 beauties of Rotterdam were unfortunately killed on Gladiator Avenue. In addition, nearly 2,000 people, including more than 300 city guards and 600 Wang clan guards, were killed. And the reason was just the rebellion of 100 orc gladiators. Caught off guard, Rotterdam paid such a heavy price for a mere 100 green-skinned beasts. Just the thought of this made Tyrrhenas tremble in anger. If he did not do something, the nobles would not let him go. The people would not let him go either. Even though Tyrrhenas felt that something was not right, the threat of the orcs was real. If all the orcs on the other side of Sodder Bridge were so terrifying, then the Dalagan kingdoms in front of Rotterdam would not be able to withstand them. When the other human kingdoms were destroyed, the last remaining Rotterdam on the continent would not be any better. At this time, King Lang and the other countries' representatives arrived. Other than Lang, Duque, and Lothar, who had already experienced the war with the orcs, the other countries' representatives were all dumbfounded. Such a tragic scene left them speechless. At this moment, two messengers galloped into the palace, one in front and one in the back. Report: a large number of orcs have appeared from Loch Modan. They have already taken down the south gate of Dan Moro and are marching towards the Iron Furnace Castle. Report: more than 100,000 orcs have been spotted in the wetlands. They are expected to reach Sodder Bridge by tomorrow. These two pieces of news were like a bolt from the blue. The dwarves' representatives from the Iron Furnace Castle and the humans' representatives from the Riptide Castle were completely destroyed. Lang had emphasized more than once that the orcs' goal was to take over the entire planet. But all the representatives subconsciously thought that it was enough for the green-skinned beasts to take over Stormwind. When the day of all-out war came, they suddenly realized that the appetite of those damn orcs was terrifying. Chapter 2:16. Dang dang dang, the alarm that represented death and danger had actually stopped a long time ago, but the long ringing of the alarm still reverberated in the ears of every citizen of Lordaeron, every noble, and every representative. This sound was a warning to the world that the peaceful days were gone, and the cruel and bloody war was coming. Without hesitation, the representatives of the various countries summoned mages and used expensive magic mirrors to transmit everything that happened in the capital of Lordaeron back to their own countries. The amount of magical gemstones needed to be consumed for such a long and large magic scene was shocking, but this time, no one was stingy with the money. In the reconvened meeting, every representative carefully watched the video of all the magic elements produced by Duque. Duque showed King Tyrrhenas and the other representatives the savagery and terror of the orcs with a huge cube with a side length of more than 10 meters. The unyielding, primal madness. The bloodthirsty, cruel, and terrifying killing. It was a berserk aura that said it would not rest until the last soldier was dead. Every scene brought a deeper shock to the representatives. When Duque played the images of the conquered lands at the end of the video, no matter adults, children, commoners, or nobles, everyone had to admit that this was a battle for the survival of their race. After the 5-minute demonstration ended, there was no other sound in the meeting room other than the sound of people gasping. Sir Marcus, can I save a copy of this video and send it back to my king? The one who spoke was the representative of Kultiras. Not only him, but the other representatives also expressed their desire to get a copy. I'm sorry, this is my unique magic technique, evolved from the inheritance of Mediv. I can't divide or transfer this magic, but I can demonstrate it again for all of you through the magic transmission. Seeing that the situation had been decided, King Tarinas of Lordaeron stood up. He first looked at King Lang. Alright, it seems that we have reached an agreement. Then, I will follow the request of King Lang Rin and officially send an appeal to the other 5 human kingdoms, as well as Kuel's Salis and Iron Furnace Fort to form an alliance to fight against the Orc Horde together. I hope to meet with the kings or messengers who can represent the will of the kings in the throne room of Lordaeron within 2 weeks. In this era, it was never easy for a king to travel. If they traveled by land or sea, it would probably take the furthest dwarves more than half a month to reach the Rotterdam kingdom in the north of the continent. Everyone knew that the beastmen's attacks were like fire. Other than the kings who dared to play with teleportation portals, riding on griffins was the only option. In this era, teleportation was very unreliable. Mastering teleportation magic was no less than asking an ordinary person to pick the only correct sesame out of 100 pounds of black sesame from 10 meters away. Not only did they have to lock onto the exact coordinates, but they also had to make sure that the spatial state from the starting point to the destination was stable. Generally speaking, only those whose surrounding space had been reinforced by a large number of spells were suitable to be the end point. For example, the capital of magic, Dalajan, or the High Elves Kuel Salis. In this day and age, the only ones who dared to play teleportation around the world without making any mistakes were Antonidas and the other 2 Breaking Dawn wizards. The matter was settled. Lang, Andoin, and Duque heaved a sigh of relief. After returning to the guest house, Andoin asked the Morning Star Mage to do a check to ensure that no one was eavesdropping. Then, he said to Duque seriously, I know the gist of the matter. It may not be appropriate for me to say this, but I still decided to say it. As a senior and a partner who has gone through life and death together, I have to remind you that it's best not to get in touch with the people from MI7. The intelligence agency that reports directly to the king has always been a forbidden place for all kings. Lang is a very open-minded person, and I know he won't mind. I can't guarantee. Alright. William should be a good king. Speaking of this, Lothar seemed to be in a bad mood. Duque was like a fox that had gotten his way. He smiled and raised his right hand to swear, I swear, I will never use my schemes against my own people. That's good. Wait, you don't treat King Tarinas as one of your own? Not before, but now I am. Hearing Duque's reply, Lothar was really speechless. At this time, Lang came in, and there seemed to be an unresolvable worry between his brows. What's wrong, Lang? Lothar seemed to be a little more casual when there was no one else in the room. No, I'm still thinking about something. It seems that the formation of the alliance is inevitable. But, who will be the leader? Isn't it His Majesty Menethil? Lothar was stunned. Duque secretly sighed. Lothar was really too naive. October. The smell of autumn was getting stronger. Be it the growing ears of rice or the heavy fruits on the branches, it was a sign that this year's harvest was going to be good. The fact that the northern continent was able to reap a bountiful harvest in this year of war was a good result. The new fields near the refugee camp in the Hillsbrad Hills might also have a good harvest. Lang and Andoin walked over to pat Duque on the shoulder. It was simply unbelievable. If Duke hadn't acted first and asked for permission from the Berev family, if Duke hadn't, stubbornly, forced all the warhorses in the army to be pulled to cultivate the land, if Duke hadn't bought the cattle at a high price from all over the place, if Duke hadn't done so. This was something that was simply impossible to achieve. If there were no accidents, they would be able to harvest a batch of summer food at the end of the month. That alleviated the food crisis near South Shore. Although the 5,000 tons of food that Duque bought at a high price sounded like a lot, it was only enough for nearly 500,000 people to eat for 2 months. However, there was now a new saying in Hillsbrad that Stormwind was actually going to occupy the land. Damn it, have you ever seen a refugee farming an entire area? From the edge of South Shore to the foot of the Alterac Mountains, almost every inch of the plains had been cleared. Every wild wolf in the mountains was used as a sumptuous meal. The caves were full of snowmen. Now that the snowmen had been slaughtered, the caves were used to store food for the winter. However, the news that the various countries were going to form an alliance suppressed all the objections. On the 8th of October, a large number of dignitaries rushed to the Rotterdam Kingdom. The meeting that was hailed as the most important to establish the alliance was finally held. Chapter 217. Alliance. It was a word that made Duke feel very happy. Before transmigrating, Duque had never thought that he would witness this moment in history. The huge golden bell was rung, and the long iron chain pulled the gears and struck the bell, producing a melodious and pleasant sound that spread throughout the entire Rotterdam Kingdom. In the east, southeast, south, southwest, west, northwest, north, and northeast, the rich Rotterdam Kingdom laid out a red carpet from the city gate to the Rotterdam Kingdom's capital for the kings and representatives of the 8 kingdoms. Similarly, the soldiers of Lordaren lined up neatly along the red carpet all the way to the capital. Walking on the red carpet on the streets of the capital, there were girls on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the tall houses on both sides, scattering beautiful flower petals towards the streets, forming a beautiful rain of flowers. The people of Lordaren cheered, welcoming the kings and representatives of the various countries as heroes. King Lang Rin of Stormwind. King Aiden Pyrenod of Alterac. King Jean Greymane of Gilneas. King Daelin Proudmoore of Kultiras. King Salas Trollbane of Stormguard, Riptide Fortress. Breaking Dawn Wizard Antonidas of the Dalajan Kirin Tor Tower Parliament. High Elves represented Senator Dalcan of the Silver Moon Parliament. Dwarves represented Prince Magni Bronzebeard of the Iron Furnace Castle. Because the Iron Furnace Castle was besieged by the orcs, King Madoran Bronzebeard could not leave, so he sent Magni, who was known as the King of Blacksmiths. Together with Muradin Bronzebeard, who was originally the ambassador of the Iron Furnace Castle in Lordaren, Lordaren now had 2 dwarven princes. It could be said that other than the High Elves, all the countries sent their highest-level leaders to attend. This had never happened in the past 1,000 years. In a sense, this also represented the strength of Lordaren. The leaders of the 8 countries arrived together, and King Turinas did not care who he welcomed first. He simply waited in the throne room for the leaders of the 8 countries. The 8 doors of the Rotterdam Kingdom were all opened, and the leaders of the various countries entered the magnificent palace almost at the same time, stepping into the throne hall. In the tall and spacious Gothic throne hall, the arches and pillars that were covered with pure white reliefs were the most beautiful works of art in themselves. The master artist used the reliefs to describe the story of Thoradin the Great's pioneering for mankind and the building of Lordaren. A huge 7-colored glass window hung at the top of the ceiling and in 9 directions. Sunlight shone in, and the entire vault was filled with colorful and beautiful colors. The orange rainbow light blended with the amethyst-like light, and the ruby light and amber light complemented each other. The entire vault looked incomparably gorgeous. Meanwhile, the lower half had the most scientific diffuse reflection system. Sunlight shone through the transparent, pure-colored glass windows and landed on the large stone balls suspended in the middle of the throne room. The light was then reflected onto every throne. This kind of warm and mysterious radiance made everyone feel a mysterious sublimation of their souls. He didn't make things difficult for anyone, nor did he look down on anyone. The 360-degree circular throne room was divided into 9 equal parts. Turinas Menethil II stood in front of the throne in the north. Turinas spoke as he watched the kings arrive in front of his seat. 2,800 years ago, in order to fight against a common enemy, the Trolls, the human Arathor Empire and the High Elves Kuel Salis Kingdom formed an alliance and established an eternal covenant. 1,200 years ago, although the Arather Empire disintegrated for a better future, the human kingdoms were still united as brothers, and there has never been a war between the kingdoms. Now, we all have a common enemy, the orcs. I hope that this time, we can reach an unbreakable and powerful covenant that unites the humans, elves, and dwarves. Menethil II's official declaration was not very exciting, but at least it was flawless. After everyone applauded, the kings and representatives sat down. Let me first report on the situation at Riptide Castle. Magni Bronzebeard's loud voice sounded first. The dwarves were known for their impatience. For example, the dwarves used fishing rods. How about it? That didn't sound like a problem, right? The problem was that this so-called fishing rod was actually a gun. What, you use fishing nets to fish in the stream? The dwarves shot at any fish they saw in the shallow water, and all the fish died. If they could blow up fish, they would not fish with nets. If they could kill fish, they would not fish. The dwarves' temperament was obvious. Magni waved his hand, and the specially invited Dalajan mage immediately used a magic mirror to show the fierce battle at the gate of Iron Stove Castle. In this world where swords and magic were the core, the dwarves' black technology was only second to the gnomes and gnomes. In the dwarven main force, there were dwarven cannons like mortars, dwarven steam tanks, and so on. Didn't it sound like a completely mechanized army? The problem was that the orcs were F*King demolition workers. An orc warrior spun a huge 4-meter-long iron pipe, thicker than a human leg, like a windmill. The dwarves relied on the mountain's terrain to make the 5 to 6 ton steam tank charge down the narrow mountain path. Unexpectedly, the berserk orc swept it horizontally, and it exploded at the foot of the mountain. When the dwarves fought against the orcs, they were not much weaker in terms of strength, but in terms of size, they were at an absolute disadvantage. The orcs swung those heavy weapons and smashed them down. In the crowded battlefield, the dwarves who had nowhere to hide could only take the hits. The result was that the two sides repeatedly fought on the mountain path in front of the Iron Stove Castle's main gate. The dwarves only fired one shot a minute or so, but it was very powerful. The orcs also threw stones unreasonably. Not just the orcs, but there were also the figures of larger, more terrifying strength and endurance of the ogres in the tribe's formation. The dwarves had suffered heavy losses. Turning off the live stream, Magni slapped his hand on the handle of his custom-made and slightly less luxurious dwarf chair, giving Tarinas a fright. Iron Stove Castle urgently needs reinforcements. What we need most are priests and medicine. Also, those damned green dwarfs ruined our farmland. Our entire autumn harvest is ruined. We also need a lot of food. The dwarves were just that straightforward. They needed food. They needed medicine. Tarinas had to remind Magni, we are now discussing the threat of the horde. We need to confirm the need to form an alliance first, then discuss how to support each other and how to deal with the horde. All right. Then let's form the alliance. Where do we seal it? With that, Magni took out a royal seal that was very characteristic of the dwarves, the hammer in his hand. The human kings were all speechless. Chapter 218. King Salas Trollbane of Stormguard spoke. The Sodder Bridge was also under heavy attack. Thanks to King Stormwind Lang's valuable experience, we did not suffer too many losses. After saying this, he also played a live video. The situation here was much better. The orcs could not pass through the huge straits with strong winds and strong waves, so they could only attack the narrow Sodder Bridge. Unlike the dwarves, where the horde could climb mountains, the orcs only had 2 bridges that looked wide during normal times, but felt narrow during battles. 30 meters wide sounded like a lot. The terrain in the northern continent was slightly higher, otherwise, why would it be called the Arthi Highlands? However, they had to withstand the firepower of more than 100 ballistae and catapults that were deployed along the mountain to the north of the bridge, as well as more than 30 arrow towers and 1,000 javelin team members who hid in the blockhouses in shifts day and night. 30 meters. That was a target, all right. No matter how brave the orcs were, they would only be cannon fodder. If this bridge had not been made by the dwarves and was extremely sturdy, an ordinary bridge would have collapsed long ago. Thus, the Stormguard people only sacrificed manpower and resources, not lives. King Salas did not forget to give King Lang a grateful look when he played the video. Without Stormwind's full set of javelin manufacturing blueprints, the warriors of Riptide's stronghold would probably still be fighting the orcs with useless bows and arrows. Not only blueprints, but a large number of craftsmen had also come to help Stormguard make the javelins while teaching the craftsmen of Riptide's stronghold. The alliance had not yet been officially established, but Stormwind was already doing its part as an ally. Moreover, before today's meeting, Duque had already made it clear to King Salas that if Riptide's stronghold needed help, his 7,000 private soldiers could go to the Arthi Highlands at any time. Of course, Salas Trollbane did not know that according to the situation, he would not have the opportunity to use such reinforcements. And it just so happened that Duque knew this, which was why he had come to offer his help. Salas had been greatly frightened by the orcs, and now that he had such a loyal ally who promised to help him for free, Salas was so touched that he almost cried and snot flowed out of his nose. If he knew that Duque turned around and muttered to himself, "It feels so good to be able to increase favorability by making a promise that doesn't need to be fulfilled." He might even want to kill Duque. Of course, these were all assumptions. With the orcs as their enemy, as well as the support of the craftsmen from Duke Stormwind Duke Marcus, Stormguard was definitely a country that responded positively to the alliance. However, it was relative. Apart from the Rotterdam kingdom that had just been slapped in the face by the orc slaves, the kings of the few countries that were closer to the north behaved rather indifferently. This was especially so for the representative of the High Elves, Councillor Dalcan of the Silvermoon Parliament. This fellow was actually admiring his newly manicured nails. Lang and Andoin could not help but frown. Why are these guys still observing at a time like this? Andoin was the most direct. He secretly kicked Duque, and whispered, "Don't you still have information to submit?" Duque rolled his eyes at Lothar, and finally raised his hand. "I, Duke Marcus of Karazhan of Stormwind, have important information to submit." Those who could attend the meeting, even if they were standing behind the king, were all important ministers of the kingdom. King Terenas nodded. "I agree to submit." In the history of the alliance, one of the biggest losses was that the leaders of the various countries had initially thought that the orcs did not know how to build ships. Now, what Duque submitted was an image that he had personally sent Darnielle and the search team of 3 ships to retrieve. The huge mirror showed the scene of a group of orc laborers working in full swing. Although the work of these crude fellows was completely unsightly, it could still be clearly seen that it was the keel of a ship. This time, the one who reacted the most violently was King Kurtiras, Dylin Proudmoore. He stood up from his throne and stared at the image with his bulging eyes. If the orcs had a large fleet, Kurtiras would have nowhere to escape. It could be said that apart from Duque's fleet, Kurtiras had no other reinforcements. That was not the end. Duque continued. "This is the image of Barradin Bay in the northwest of the southern continent. It happens to be separated from South Shore by a sea. As everyone knows, we, Stormwind, have a fleet of more than 100 warships, more than 10,000 murlocs, and hundreds of Naga. Even without Kurtira's fleet, we dare to say that we can defend South Shore. However, there is nothing we can do in other places." In the center of the 7 thrones and the 2 representative seats, in front of the huge map of the Eastern Kingdom, Duque let a hand of magic float gently on the map. From the Barradin Bay to the west, around South Shore, to the north of the land. At this time, it was King Xian of the Gilneas Kingdom's turn to look bad. Of course, King Terenas of Lordaeron was also in a bad mood. Because near the finger of Duque's hand of magic was the North Stream coast, which was convenient for landing. What was the coast? Wasn't it Lordaeron's Silverpine Forest? At this time, Duque said seriously, "Of course, this is just a guess. Maybe." The direction of the hand of magic changed. This time, it went east from Barradin Bay, all the way under Sadr Bridge, to the southeast of the northern continent, and then north along the Cape. This time, it went over the steep earthy highlands, which was full of elemental creatures, and pointed further north to the east coast of the hinterlands. This time, it was King Alterak's turn to look bad, but his reaction was not too intense. Is it there? That's even better, let those damned trolls fight the green-skinned monsters, Eden argued. What if those trolls join the tribe? Duque asked back with a cold smile. Eden was very unhappy with Duque's questioning. Then at least those dwarves from the Eagle Nest Mountain will be at the front. As soon as Eden's voice fell, Dwarf Prince Magni was not happy. Hey! King of Alterak, watch your tone. Those are our dwarven brothers. That's right, brothers who fight and kill each other. Eden shot a disdainful glance at Mag, bastard. Even after the War of the Three Hammers. But we've made up with the Wild Hammer dwarves. I'm warning you, don't insult our Wild Hammer brothers again, or I'll not let you off. Magni waved his hammer angrily. Humph. Eden snorted coldly and answered with silence. It was a sign that he did not want to pursue the matter further. Beside Magni, Muradin Bronzebeard, who had been an ambassador for many years, was more tactful. He pulled his brother back. Duque glanced at King Eden. Although he quickly retracted his gaze, Noxus still saw that moment of disdain. That was the look of disdain when looking at a dead man. Duque's deduction based on the orc's shipbuilding ended here. If it wasn't for the heavy atmosphere, Lang almost wanted to applaud Duque's wonderful deduction. In any case, Duque had successfully established the common foundation of the entire alliance. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.